The podcast.
I'm really happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Wow. I love to hear that. I've also been looking forward to this for a while. I have so much to talk about. So first of all, you've been at Anthropic for just over a year at this point. Congrats, by the way, on hitting the cliff.
Thank you. Not that we're tracking.
That's right. So let me just ask you this. So you've been at Anthropic for about a year. What's something that you've changed your mind about from before you joined Anthropic to today about what AI is capable of and where AI is heading?
Two things. One is like a pace and timeline question. And the other one is a capability question. So maybe I'll take the second one first. I had this notion coming in like, yes, these models are great. They're going to be able to produce code. They're going to be able to, write, hopefully in your voice eventually. But are they able to sort of have an independent opinion? And it's actually really flipped for me only in the last month and only with Opus 4, where my go-to product strategy partner is Claude. And it has been basically for that full year. Well, I'll write an initial strategy. I'll share it with Claude basically, and I'll have it, look at it. And in the past, it's pretty anodyne kind of comments that it would leave like, oh, have you thought about this? And it's like, yeah, I thought about that. And Opus 4, I was working on some strategy for our second half of the year, was the first one. It was like Opus 4 combined with our advanced research, but it really went out for a while and it came back and I was like, damn, you really looked at it in a new way. And so that's like a thing that I didn't feel like it would never be able to do that, but I wasn't sure how soon it'd be able to like come up with something where I look at it, I'm like, yep, that is a new angle that I hadn't been looking at before. And I'm going to incorporate that immediately into how I think about it. So that's probably the biggest shift that I've had is like, I don't know about independence is the right word, but like creativity and sort of novelty of thought relative to how I'm thinking about things. But in the timeline one, it's like so interesting because, I was sitting next to Dario yesterday and he's like, I keep making these predictions and people keep laughing at me and then they come true. And it's like, and it's funny to have this happen over and over again. And he's like, not all of them are going to be right, but even I think as of last year, he was talking about, we're at 50% on SweBench, which is this like, benchmark around how well the models are at coding. He's like, I think we'll be at 90% by the end of 2025 or something like that. And sure enough, we're at about 72 now with the new models. And we're at 50% when he made that prediction. And it's like continued to scale pretty much like as predicted. And so I've taken the timelines a lot more seriously now. And I don't know if you read AI 2027.
I have. It was made by Heart Race.
Yeah. And I had the very bizarre experience of I had two tabs open. It was AI 2027 and my product strategy. And it was this like moment where I'm like, wait, am I the character in the story? Like, how much is this converging? But, you read that and you're like, oh, 2027, that's years away. But you're like, no, we're mid 2025 and like things continue to improve and the models continue to be able to do more and more. And they're able to act agentically and they're able to have memory and they're able to act over time. So I think my confidence in the timelines, and I don't know exactly how they manifest, have definitely just solidified over the last year.
Wow. I wasn't expecting to go down that because that paper was scary. And I'm curious, just, I guess I can't help but ask, just thoughts on just how do we avoid the scary scenario that paper paints of where AI getting really smart goes?
Yeah. I mean, I this maybe ties into like, I've been here a year, like, why did I join Anthropic? I was watching the models get better. And even, you could see it in 24 and like, early 2024 and looking at my kids, I'm like, all right, they're going to grow up in a world with AI. It's unavoidable. What is the thing that I can, like, where can I maximally apply my time to like nudge things towards going well? And I mean, that's a lot of what people think about across the industry, especially at Anthropic. And so I think, coming to an agreement and a shared framework and understanding of like, what does going well look like? What is the kind of human AI relationship that we want? How will we know along the way? What do we need to build and develop and research along the way? I think those are all the kind of key questions. And, some of those are product questions and some of those are research and interpretability questions. But for me, it was like the strongest reason to join was, okay, I think there's a lot of contribution that Anthropic can have around like nudging things to go better. And if I can have a part to play there, like, let's do it.
I love that answer. Speaking of kids, so you've got two kids. I've got a young kid. He's just about to turn 2. I'm curious just what skills you're encouraging your kids to build as this, AI becomes more and more of our future and some jobs, will be changed. And just what advice do you have?
We have this, breakfast, we eat breakfast with the kids every morning. And sometimes some question will come up, something about like physics. And our oldest kid's almost 6, but, they ask like funny questions about like, the solar system or physics or, in the 6-year-old way. And before we reach for Claude, because at first, my instinct is like, oh, I wonder how Claude will do this question. And like, we started changing, like, well, how would we find out, and the answer can't just be, we'll ask Claude, so, all right, like, well, we could do this experiment. We could have this thing. So I think nurturing curiosity and like still having a sense of, I don't know, the scientific process sounds grandiose to instill in like a 6-year-old, but like that process of like discovery and asking questions and then, systematically working right through it, I think will still be important. And of course, AI will be an incredible tool for helping like resolve large parts of that. But that process of inquiry, I think, is still really important and independent thought. My favorite moment with my kid, because she's very headstrong, our 6-year-old. She's, I was like, she said something and I was like, I wasn't sure if it was true. It was, it was like coral is an animal or like coral is alive. I don't even remember the details of it. And I was like, I don't know if that's true. And she's like, it's definitely true, Dad. I'm like, all right, like, let's ask Claude on this one. And she's like, you can ask Claude, but I know I'm right. And I'm like, I love that. Like, I want that kind of level of, not just sort of delegating all of your cognition to the, to the AI, because it won't always get it right. And also kind of like, kind of short circuits any kind of independent thought. So the skill of asking questions, inquiry, and independent thinking, I think those are all the pieces. What that looks like from a like job or occupation perspective, like I'm just keeping an open mind, and I'm sure that'll radically change between now and then.
It's interesting. I had Toby Lutke, Shopify CEO, on the podcast, and he had the same answer for what he's encouraging his kids to develop is curiosity. And so it's interesting. That's a common thread.
The K through 8 school our kid goes through had an AI and education expert come in, and I had a very low bar or like a very low expectations of what this conversation was going to be like. And actually, I think it went over most of the people in the audience's heads, because he was like, all right, well, let me take it all the way back to Claude Shannon and information theory. And I could see people's eyes going like, what did I like sign up for? Why am I here in this like school auditorium hearing about, information theory? But he did a really nice job, I think, of also just imagining like, there will be different jobs and we don't know what those jobs are going to be. And so like, what are the skills and techniques and remain open-mindedness and around like what the exact way we recombine those things. And even those will probably change 3 times between now and when they're 18.
I want to go back to, so we're talking about timelines and how things are changing. So I've seen these stats that you've shared, other folks at Anthropic have shared about how much of your code is now written by AI. So people have shared stats from like 70% to like 90%. There was an engineer lead that shared like 90% of your code roughly is written by AI now, which first of all is just insane that like it went from 0 to 90%. I don't know, a few years, something like that. Basically. I don't think people are talking about this enough. That's just wild. You guys are basically at the bleeding edge. I've never heard a company that has this high a percentage of code being written by AI. So you guys are at the edge of where things are heading. I think most companies will get here. How has product development changed knowing so much of your code is now written by AI? So usually it's like PM, it's like, here's what we're building, engineer builds it, ships it. Is it still kind of roughly that, or is it now PMs are just going straight to Claude, build this thing for me, engineers are doing different things? Just what looks different in a world where 90% of your code is written by AI?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the role of engineering has changed a lot, but the kind of suite of people that come together to produce a product hasn't yet. And I think for the worse in a lot of ways, because I think we're still holding on some assumptions. So I think the roles are still fairly similar, although we'll now get, in my favorite things that happen now are sometimes PMs that have an idea that they want to express, or designers that have an idea they want to express. We'll use Claude and like maybe even artifacts to like put together an actual like functional demo. And that has been very, very helpful. Like, no, this is what I mean. Like that makes it tangible. That's probably the biggest like role shift, is like prototyping happening earlier in the process via more of this kind of, code plus design piece. What I've learned though is like the process of knowing what to ask the AI, how to compose the question, how to even think about like structuring a change between the back end and the front end. Those are still very difficult and specialized skills, and they still require the engineer to think about it. And we really rapidly became bottlenecked on other things like our merge queue, which is the sort of get in line to get your change accepted by the system that then deploys it to production. We had to completely re-architect it because so much more code was being written and so many more pull requests were being submitted that it just completely blew out the expectations of it. And so It's like, I don't know if you've ever read, is it The Goal, the classic like process optimization book? And
Yeah.
you realize there's like this like critical path theory. I've just found all these new bottlenecks in our system. There's an upstream bottleneck, which is decision making and alignment. A lot of things that I'm thinking about right now is like, how do I provide the like minimum viable strategy to let people feel empowered to go run and prototype and build and explore at the edge of model capabilities? I don't think I've gotten that right yet, but it's something I'm working on. And then once the building is happening, other bottlenecks emerge. Like, let's make sure we don't step on each other's toes. Let's think through all the edge cases here ahead of time so that we're not blocked on the engineering side. And then when the work is complete and we're getting ready to ship it, what are all those bottlenecks as well? Like, let's do the air traffic control of landing the change. Like, how do we figure out launch strategy? So I think there hasn't been as much pressure on changing those until this year, but I would expect that like a year from now, the way that we are like conceiving of building and shipping software just changes a lot because it's going to be very painful to do it the current way.
Wow, that is extremely interesting. So it used to be, here's an idea, let's go design it, build it, ship it, merge it, and then ship it. And usually the bottleneck was engineering taking time to build the thing and then design. And now you're saying the two bottlenecks you're finding are, okay, deciding what to build and aligning everyone. And then it's actually like the queue to merge it into production and I imagine review it too is probably a part of it.
Reviewing has really changed too. And in many ways, our most, perhaps unsurprisingly, the team that works in the most futuristic way is the Claude Code team, because they're using Claude Code to build Claude Code in a very self-improving kind of way. And, early on in that project, they would do very line by line pull request reviews, in the way that you would for any other, project. And they've just realized like Claude is generally right and it's producing pull requests that are probably larger than most people are going to be able to review. So can you use a different Claude to review it and then do the human almost like acceptance testing more than trying to like review line by line? There's definitely pros and cons. And like, so far it's gone well, but I could also imagine it going off the rails and then having like a completely both unmaintainable or even understandable by Claude code base that hasn't happened. But watching them like change their review processes definitely has been interesting. And yeah, like the merge queue is one instance of the kind of bottom bottleneck that forms down there. But there's other ones, which is how do we make sure that we're still like building something coherent and like packaging it up into like a moment that we can share with people. And whether that's around a launch moment, whether that's about like then enabling people to use this thing and like talking about it, like the classic things of building something useful for people and then making it known that you've built it and then learning from their feedback, like still exists. We've just like made a portion of that whole process much more efficient.
I heard you describe this as you guys are patient zero for this way of working.
Yes.
I love that. Do you have a sense of what percentage of Claude Code is written by Claude Code?
At this point, I would be shocked if it wasn't 95% plus. I'd have to ask Boris and the other tech leads on there. But what's been cool is, so nitty gritty stuff. Claude Code is written in TypeScript. It's actually our largest TypeScript project. Most of the rest of Anthropic is written in Python, some Go, some Rust now. But it's not, we're not like a TypeScript shop. And so I saw a great comment yesterday in our Slack where somebody had this thing that was driving them crazy about Claude Code. And they're like, well, I don't know any TypeScript. I'm just going to like talk to Claude about it and do it. And they went from that to pull request in an hour and solved their problem. And they like, submitted a pull request. And that kind of breaking down the barriers, one, it changes your sort of barrier to entry for any kind of newcomer to the project. I think it can let you choose the right language for the right job, for example. I think that helps as well. But I think it like also just reinforces like Claude Code being that patient alpha of that, where like even the contributions from outside the team can be Claude coded as well.
Wow. This is just, it's just going to continue to blow my mind. Like all these things that you're sharing. 95% of Claude Code is written by Claude Code, roughly.
That's my guess. Yeah, I'll come back with the real stuff. But if you ask the team, that's how that they're working and that's how they're getting contributions from across the company too.
It's interesting going back to your point about strategy being assisted by Claude itself and your point about how a lot of the bottlenecks now are kind of the top of the funnel of coming up with ideas aligning everyone. It's interesting that Claude is already helping with that also, of helping you decide what to build. So if those two bottlenecks are aligning, deciding what to build, and then just like merging and getting everything, where do you see the most interesting stuff happening to help you speed those things up?
Yeah, I think that on that first front, like I started the year by writing a doc that was effectively like, how do we do product today? And where is Claude not showing up yet that it should? And I think that upstream part is the next one to go. It's interesting. Like at your conference, I talked to somebody who was working on like a PRD, GPT, kind of like chat PRD, I think
Chat PRD,
yeah.
player vote.
So, can we push more on, can Claude be a partner in figuring out what to build, what the market size is, if you want to approach it that way, what the user needs are, if you look at it a different way. Like, we think a lot about the virtual collaborator Anthropic, and one of the ways in which I think that can show up is, hey, I'm in the Discord, the Claude Anthropic Discord. I'm in the user fora. I'm on X and I'm reading things, and like, here's what's emergent. That's step one. Models can do that today. Step two, which the models probably can do today, we just have to wire them up to do it, is like, and not only are the problems, here's like how I think you might be able to solve them. And then taking that through to like, and I like put together a pull request to like solve this thing that I'm seeing, like feels very achievable this year. And stringing those things together. And we're limited more. This is why MCP is exciting to me. Like, we're limited more around like making sure the context flows through all of that, so we have the right access to those things, more than the model's capability to reason and propose. Now, the model might not have like perfect UI taste yet, so there's definitely room for design to intervene and be like, oh, that's not quite how I would solve the problem of this not showing up. But I would get very excited. I would give you a really small example, but we changed on Cloud AI. You used to be able to just copy markdown from artifacts or code from artifacts, and we changed it so you can actually download it and export it. So we changed the button to export, and we got a bunch of feedback like, how do I copy now? And the answer is like, you drop it down and it's copied. It's just like mine, one of those things where it's like, made sense, but we probably got it like not quite right. That feedback was in our UX channel. Like, I would have loved like an hour later for Claude to be like, hey, if we do want to change it back, here's the PR to do it. And by the way, eventually, and then I'm going to spin up an A/B test to see if this changes metrics, and then we'll see how it looks in a week. Like, this stuff feels, if you told me that about a year and a half ago, I'm like, yeah, maybe like 27, maybe like 26, but it's pretty much like, it really feels, just at the tip of capabilities right now.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned the Lenny and Friends Summit. I wanted to talk about this a bit. So you were on a panel with Kevin Weil, the CPO of OpenAI. I think it was the first time you guys did this, maybe the last time for now.
Yeah, we haven't done it since, not for any reason. I had a lot of fun.
What a legendary panel we assembled there with Sarah Guo moderating. And you made this comment, it actually ended up being the most rewatched part of the interview, which is that you were putting product people on the model team and working with researchers, making the model better. And you're putting some product people on the product experience, making the UX more intuitive, making all that better. And you found that almost all the leverage came from the product team working with the researchers.
Yes.
And so you've been doing more of that. So first of all, does that continue to be true? And second of all, what are the implications of that for product teams?
It's continued to be true. And in fact, I think that if the proportion was already like skewing towards having more of that embedding, I've just become more and more convinced. Like, I have this, I didn't feel as strongly about it during the summit. And now I feel really strongly about it. Just if we're shipping things that could have been built by anybody just using our models off the shelf, there's great stuff to be built by using our models off the shelf, by the way, don't get me wrong. But like, where we should play and like what we can do uniquely should be stuff that's really at that like magic intersection between the two, right? Artifacts being a great example. And if you play with artifacts with Claude 4, that's an actually really interesting example where we took somebody from we call it Claude Skills, which is a team that really is like doing the post-training around teaching Claude, some of these like really specific skills. And we paired it with some product people. And then together we revamped how this looks in the product today and like what Claude can do way better than just like, yeah, we just like use the model and we like prompted a little bit. Like, that's just not enough. We need to be in that like fine-tuning process. So much of what, if you look at what we're working on right now, what we've shipped recently between like research and all these other things, like are things that we like the functional unit of work at Anthropic is no longer like take the model and then like go like work with design and product to go ship a product. It's more like we're in the post-training conversations around how these things should work. And then we are in the building process and we're like feeding those things back and looping them back. Like, I think it's exciting. It's also a new way of working that like not all PMs have, but the PMs that have the most sort of internal positive feedback from both research and engineering are the ones that get it. That like, I was in a product review yesterday. I was like, oh, if we want to do this memory feature, like we should talk to the researchers because we just shipped a bunch of like memory capabilities in Cloud. They're like, yeah, we've been talking to them for weeks. Like, this is how we're manifesting it. It's like, okay, I feel good. I feel like we're doing the right things now.
So let me pull on this thread more. There's something I've been thinking about along these lines. So essentially, there's like a big part of Anthropic that's building this super intelligent gigabrain that's going to do all these things for us over time. And then there's, as you said, there's like the product team that's building the UX around this super intelligent gigabrain. And over time, this super intelligence is going to be able to build its own stuff. And so I guess just where do you think the most value will come from traditional product teams over time? I know this is different because you guys are a foundational LM company, and not most companies don't work this way. But just, I don't know, thoughts on just where most value will come from product teams over time working on AI.
I think there's still value, a lot of value in two things. One is making this all comprehensible. I think we've done an okay job. I think we could do a much better job of making this comprehensible. It's still like the difference between somebody who's really adept at using these tools in their work and most people is huge. And I mean, maybe that's the most literal answer to your earlier question around like what skills to learn. That is a skill to learn and use it in the same way that I remember we did like computer lab class when I was in like middle school. And I remember being like really good at Google. And that was actually a skill back in the day, you know, like to think in terms of like, this information is out there. How do I query for it? How do I do it? And I think it actually was like an advantage at the time. Of course, now Google is pretty good at figuring out what you're trying to do if you like are only in the neighborhood and like there's less of that research kind of need. But I still think that's a necessary part of like good product development, which is like the capabilities are there. And even if Claude can create products from scratch, what are you building and how do you make it comprehensible? Like still hard. Cause I think that like gets at like this much deeper empathy and like understanding of human needs and psychology. Like I was a human computer interaction major. I've still been talking my book here. Like I still feel like that is a very, 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 very necessary skill. So that's one. Two is, and this, you know, straight to call back to another one of your guests, like strategy, like how we win, where we'll play, like figuring out where exactly you're going to want to like, of all the things that you could be spending your time or your tokens or your computation on, like what you want to actually go and do. You could be wider probably than you could before, but you can't do everything. And even like from an external perspective, if you're seen to be doing everything, like it's way less clear around like how you're positioning yourself. So like strategy, I think is still the second piece. And then the third one is opening people's eyes to what's possible, which is a continuation of making it understandable. But we were in a demo with a financial services company recently, and we were like working on like, here's how you can use our analysis tool and MCP together. And like, you could see their eyes light up and you're like, okay, like there's still we call it overhang, right? Like the delta between what the models and the products can do and how they're being used on a daily basis, huge overhang. So that's where still like a very, very strong, necessary role for product.
Okay, that's an awesome answer. So essentially areas for product teams to lean into more is strategy, just getting better and better at strategy, figuring out what to build and how to win in the market, making it easier to help people understand how to leverage the power of these tools, the comprehensibility, and kind of along those lines is opening people's eyes to the potential of these sorts of things. That's where product can still help.
Exactly.
Awesome. So kind of along those lines, actually, do you have any just like prompting tricks for people, things that you've learned to get more out of Claude when you chat with it?
Sometimes it's funny because we, in some ways we have like the ultimate prompting job, which is to write the system prompt for Claude AI. And we publish all of these, which I think is like another nice area of transparency. And we are always careful when giving prompting advice because at least officially, but I'll give you the unofficial version because like, you don't want things to become like we think this works, but we're not sure why, but I'll do small things like in Claude Code, and we actually do react to this very literally, but I always ask it to like, if I wanted to use more reasoning, like think hard, and it'll like, use a kind of a different flow. And I usually start with that, nudging. There's a great essay around like, make the other mistake. Like if you tend to be too nice, can you focus on like, even if you're trying to be more critical or more blunt, you're probably not going to be the most critical, blunt person in the world. And so with Claude, sometimes I'm like, be brutal, Claude, like roast me, like tell me what's wrong with this strategy. I know we were talking earlier about the, Claude as thought partner around like critiquing product strategy. I think I previously would say things like, like what could be better on this product strategy? And I'm just like, just roast this product strategy. And Claude's like a pretty nice, entity. It's not going to be, it's hard to push it to be super brutal, but it forces it to be a little bit more critical as well. The last thing I'll say is, so we have a team called Applied AI that does a lot of like work with our customers around optimizing Claude for their use case. And we basically took their insights and their way of working and we put it into a product itself. So if you go to our console, our workbench, we have this thing called the prompt improver, where you describe the problem and you give it examples. And Claude itself will agentically create and then iterate on a prompt for you. I find what comes out of that ends up being quite different than what my intuitions would have been for a good prompt. And so I'd encourage folks to also check that out, even for their own use cases, because while that tool is meant for an API developer putting a prompt into their product, it's equally applicable for a person doing a prompt for themselves. Like it'll insert XML tags, which no human is going to think to do ahead of time. It actually is very helpful for Claude to understand like what it should be thinking versus what it should be saying, et cetera. So that's another one, is like watch our prompt improver and then note that like Claude itself is a very good prompter of Claude.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to link to that, the prompt improver. The core piece of advice you shared earlier is just kind of do the opposite of what you would naturally do. So if you're like trying to be nice, just like be brutal, be like very honest and frank with me.
Exactly. I find that works quite well. Like what are the thought patterns that I've like fallen into that you want to break me out of?
I saw you guys just today maybe launched a Rick Rubin collab where it's like vibe coding. What's that all about?
That was what I've heard about that. And then again, like this, a lot of coalesced this week between model launch, developer event, and the way of code. We had our one of our co-founders, Jack Clark, is our head of policy, and he got connected to Rick Rubin because I think he's been thinking a lot about coding, the future of coding and creativity, and they've stayed in touch. And Rick got excited about this idea of like he was creating like art and visualizations with Claude, and then he had these like ideas around like the way of the vibe coder, and they put together this. Actually, I love almost everything Rick Rubin. So like the aesthetic of it, I think is just like so on point too. But yeah, it's this sort of like meditation is probably the right word. Meditation on like creativity, working alongside AI, coupled with this like really rich, interesting visualizations. But it's one of those things where like internally they're like, oh yeah, and we're doing this like Rick Rubin collab. We're doing what? Like that's amazing.
I looked at it briefly, and there's like that meme of him like just like thinking deeply, sitting on a computer with a mouse.
Yes.
And like ASCII art, I think.
It's like ASCII art 5.
I'm excited to have Andrew Luo joining us today. Andrew is CEO of One Schema, one of our longtime podcast sponsors. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, Lenny. Great to be here.
So what is new with One Schema? I know that you work with some of my favorite companies like Ramp and Vanta and Watershed. I heard you guys launched a new data intake product that automates the hours of manual work that teams spend importing and mapping and integrating CSV and Excel files.
Yes, so we just launched the 2.0 of One Schema file feeds. We've rebuilt it from the ground up with AI. We saw so many customers coming to us with teams of data engineers that struggled with the manual work required to clean messy spreadsheets. File Feeds 2.0 allows non-technical teams to automate the process of transforming CSV and Excel files with just a simple prompt. We support all of the trickiest file integrations, SFTP, S3, and even email.
I can tell you that if my team had to build integrations like this, how nice would it be to take this off our roadmap and instead use something like One Schema?
Absolutely, Lenny. We've heard so many horror stories of outages from even just a single bad record in transactions, employee files, purchase orders, you name it. Debugging these issues is often like finding a needle in a haystack. One Schema stops any bad data from entering your system and automatically validates your files, generating error reports with the exact issues in all bad files.
I know that importing incorrect data can cause all kinds of pain for your customers and quickly lose their trust. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. If you want to learn more, head on over to oneschema.co. That's oneschema.co. Actually, going back to kind of the beginning of your journey at Anthropic, what's the story of you getting recruited at Anthropic? Is there anything fun there?
It all started, and I actually sent my friend this text. So Joel Lewenstein, who I've known, he and I built our first iPhone apps together in 2007 when the App Store was just out and you could still, make money by selling dollar apps on the App Store, back in the day. And we were both at Stanford together, and we were friends, and we've stayed in touch over years, and we've never gotten to work together since then. We've just remained close. And I was coming out of the Artifact experience. I was trying to figure out, do I start another company? I don't think so. I need a break from starting something from zero. Do I go work somewhere? I don't know, like what company would I want to go work at? And he reached out and he's like, look, I don't know if you'd at all consider joining something rather than starting something, but we're looking for a CPO. Would you be interested in chatting? And at that time, Claude 3 had just come out. And I was like, okay, like this company's clearly got a good research team. The product is so early still. And it was like, great, I'll take the meeting. And I first met with Daniela, who's one of the co-founders and the president at Anthropic. And just from the beginning, it was like a breath of fresh air, like very little like grandiosity coming off the founders. Like they just were really, they're clear-eyed about what they're building. They know what they don't know. Like how many times I talked to Daria, Daria's like, look, I don't know anything about product, but here's an intuition. Usually the intuition is really good and leads to some good conversation. Then they got intellectual honesty and like kind of shared view of what it means to do AI in a like responsible way. It just resonated. I kept having this feeling in these interviews, like, this is the AI company I would have hoped to have founded if I had founded an AI company. And that's kind of the bar around, like, if I'm going to join something, like that should be where I'm going to go. But what I realized, I actually hadn't joined a company since my like first internship in college, basically. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, like, how do I onboard myself? Like, how do I get myself, up to speed? Like, how do I balance making sweeping changes versus understanding what's not broken about it overall? And like looking back on a year, I think I made some changes too slowly. Like, I think there was like ways we were organizing a product that I could have made a change earlier. And I think I didn't appreciate how much a couple of really key senior people can shape so much of product strategy. I'll harken back to Claude Code. Like, Claude Code happened because Boris, who actually was Boris Turney, he was an Instagram engineer and like one of our senior ICs there. We overlapped a bit, was like, started that project from scratch, internal first, and then we like got it out and then shipped it. And like, that's the power of like one or two really strong people. And I made this mistake around, we need more headcount. And we do, like, I think there's like more work that we need to do. And there's like things that I want to be building, but more so than that, we need a couple of like almost founder type engineers that maybe connect back to our question on like what skills are useful and how does product development change. I still, and maybe even more so, I'm a huge believer in like the founding engineer, tech lead with an idea and pair them with the right like design and product support to like help them realize that. I'm like 10 times more a believer in that than before.
Mhm. I actually asked people on Twitter what to ask you ahead of this conversation, and the most common question, surprisingly, was, "Why did you shut down Artifact?" And I also wondered that because I loved Artifact. I was a power user. I was just like, this is exactly, finally, a news app that I love, that it's giving me what I want to know. So I guess just what happened there at the end.
I still really miss it too, because I didn't find a replacement. And I think I substituted it by like visiting individual sites and kind of keeping things up that way. And it's not really the same, especially on the long tail. Like, I think we got right with Artifact. And if people didn't play with it before, it was, we really tried to not just recommend like top stories, they were part of it, but really like if you were interested in Japanese architecture, like you could pretty reliably get really interesting stories about Japanese architecture every day, whether that's from a, Dwell or from Architectural Digest or from a really specific blog that we found that somebody recommended to us. Like, it captured some of that Google Reader joy of like content discovery of the deeper web. Our headwinds were a couple. One of them was just mobile websites have really taken a turn. I don't blame any individuals for this. I think it's the like market dynamics of it. But yeah, we put so much time, our designer was this guy, Gunnar Gray, who's phenomenal. He's at Perplexity now. Like, the app experience I was so proud of, but when you click through, it was like the pressures on these mobile sites and these mobile publishers would be like, sign up for our newsletter. Here's like a full screen video ad. It was just very, it was very jarring. And we didn't feel like it ethically made sense for us to like do a bunch of ad blocking. Cause then you're like, sure, you can deliver a nice experience for people, but you're sort of, that doesn't feel like it's playing fair with the publishers. And at the same time, like the actual experience wasn't good. So the mobile web deteriorating, which makes me very sad, but I think was part of it. Two was like, Instagram spread in the early days because people would take photos and then post them on other networks and tell friends about it. And there was like this really natural, like, how did you do that? I want to do it. News was very personal. Like, I can't tell you how many people would be like, I love Artifact. I'm like, did you tell anybody about it? Like, and they're like, yeah, I told one person. And then it's like, it didn't have that kind of spread. And any attempt that we had to do it felt kind of contrived. Like, oh, we'll wrap all the links in like artifact.news and like, but we didn't want interstitial things. Like, in some ways, I don't know, this sounds very puritanical. I don't mean it to sound this way, but like there were lines that we didn't want to cross because it just felt ethically not us, that I've seen other news kind of like players like do more of. And maybe if we had done that, it would have grown more. But I don't think that's the company we wanted to have built. In other ways, I don't think we were the founders to have built it. And the third one, which is an underappreciated one, is we started it mid-COVID, which meant that we were fully distributed. And I think there were like major shifts that we would have wanted to make both in the strategy and the product and the team. And it's really hard to do that if you are all fully remote. Like, nothing replaces like the Instagram days of like, we went through some, hard times, like Ben Horowitz called the like, we're effed, it's over, kind of moments. And my favorite, this is definitely type 2 fun. Like, I wouldn't say that my favorite memories because they weren't happy ones, but like memories that really stayed with me with Instagram was like me and Kevin at Taqueria Cancun on Market Street, eating burritos at literally 11 p.m. being like, how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to work through this? Like, and that's, Zoom is not a good replica for that. You tend to like let things go, or, things build up over time. So the confluence of those three things, we kind of entered, I guess, 2024 and said, look, there is a company to be built in the space. I'm not sure we're the people to build it. This current incarnation we love, but it's like not growing. Like the way I put it, it's like 10 units of input in for 1 unit of output versus the other way around. Like if we like put blood, sweat, and tears into the product and like launch something we were proud of and like metrics would barely move them, like the energy is not present in this product, in this system. And so are we going to like expend another year or two and then go off and fundraise only to find that this is the case? Or do we like call it and see that it's run its course and try to find a home for it, et cetera? So that was the confluence on it. And started feeling this opportunity cost of like, AI is starting to change everything. We have an AI powered news app, but is this the like maximal way in which like we're going to be able to impact this? And it felt like the answer was increasingly no, but it was hard. I mean, in the end, I was really at peace with the decision, but it was like a conversation that went on for a couple of months.
On that note, just how hard was it? Because there's an ego component to it. Like, oh, I'm starting my new company. It's going to be great. And then you end up having to shut it down. Just how hard is that as a very successful previous founder shutting something down and it not working out?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we started it, one of the conversations was like, what is the bar to success here? And do we want it to be something other than Instagram DAU, which is just an impossible bar? Like only one company since, maybe two, right? You could say maybe ChatGPT and TikTok have like reached that kind of like mass consumer adoption. Starting a news app, like most people are not like daily news readers even, right? And so we knew that we weren't pursuing that size of like usage, at least with the kind of first incarnation, but we did have like an idea of like building out complementary products over time that all use personalization and machine learning. We didn't even call it AI at the time. This was 2021 back.
Yeah.
In the day.
AI was called machine learning back then.
Yeah, it was called machine learning still. And so in shutting it down, it's like, you kind of know it when you see it in terms of like user growth and traction. And I wasn't expecting Instagram growth, but I was expecting or hoping for or looking for something that like felt like it had its own legs under it and it could continue to compound. I was really positively surprised by how supportive people were when we announced it. There was a bit of like, I told you so. It's like, sure, anything launching, you could be like, this is not going to work. And you're right most of the time, because most things don't work. There was actually very little of that. And most people, the universal reception, at least as I received it, was kudos for calling it when you saw it and not like kind of protracted, doing this for a long time. And I've talked to founders since then that have been like, yeah, I like probably would have like taken this thing on for another 6 months, but saw what you guys did, realized we were barking up the wrong tree, made the call. And I was like, if that frees up people to go work on more interesting things, that's like, I feel like that's like a good legacy for Artifact to have. But for sure, there was like an ego bruise of, like, are people, is it true that you're only as good as your last game? If I'm a huge sports fan, right? So like, is that true? Or, is there something more over time? I'm very competitive, but primarily with myself. And so I'm always trying to find the next thing that I want to go and do that's hard. And unfortunately, that probably means that more often than not, I'll feel dissatisfied with the most recent thing that I did, but hopefully that yields good stuff in the end.
Yeah. I think just the trajectory you went on after shows that it's okay to shut down things that you were working on. Okay, so you mentioned ChatGPT. I wanted to chat about this a bit. So there's something really interesting happening. So on the one hand, you guys are doing some of the most innovative work in AI. You guys launched MCP, which is just like, I don't know, the fastest growing standard of any time in history that everyone's adopting. Claude powered and unlocked essentially the fastest growing companies in the world, Cursor, Lovable, and Bolt, and all these guys. Like I had them on the podcast and they're all like, when Claude, I think 3.5 came out, saw it, it was just like, that's all made this work finally. On the other hand, it feels like ChatGPT is just winning in like consumer mind share. When people think AI, especially outside tech, it's just like ChatGPT in their mind. So let me just ask you this. I guess, first of all, do you agree with that sentiment? And then two, as a kind of a challenger brand in the AI space, just how does that inform the way you think about product and strategy and mission and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the sort of like public adoption, or like if you ask people like, oh, like if you Jimmy Kimmel Man on the street kind of thing, like name an AI company, I bet they would name, and actually I'm not even sure they name OpenAI. They'd probably name ChatGPT because that brand is the kind of lead brand there as well. And I think that's just the reality of it. I think that, when I reflect on my year, I think maybe two things are true. One is like consumer adoption is really lightning in a bottle. And we saw it at Instagram. So like almost maybe more than anybody, I can look internally and say like, look, we'll keep building interesting products. One of them may hit, but to kind of craft an entire product strategy around like trying to find that hit and is probably not wise. We could do it and maybe Claude can help come up with the fullness of things, but I think we'd miss out on opportunities in the meantime. And then instead, look yourself in the mirror and embrace who you are and what you could be rather than like who others are is maybe the way I've been looking at it, which is we have a super strong developer brand. People build on top of us all the time. And I think we also have like a builder brand, like the people who I've seen react really well to Claude externally. Maybe the Rick Rubin connection like has some resonance here as well. Like, can we lean into the fact that like builders love using Claude, and those builders aren't all just engineers, and they're all not just all entrepreneurs starting their companies, but they're people that like to be at the like forefront of AI and are creating things. Maybe they didn't think of those as engineers, but they're building. I got this really nice note from somebody internal to Anthropic who's on the legal team, and he was building like bespoke software for his family and connected to them in a new way. And I was like, this is a glimmer of something that we should lean into a lot more. And so I think what I've, and this is actually, connecting back to what I was saying, like Claude's being helpful here. Like a lot of what I've been thinking about, like going into the second half of the year and beyond is like, how do we figure out what we want to be when we grow up versus like what we currently aren't or wish that we were, or like see other players in the space being? I think there's room for several like generationally important companies to be built in AI right now. That's almost a truism given like the sort of adoption and growth that we've seen, at Anthropic, but also across OpenAI and also places like Google and Gemini. So like, let's figure out what we can be uniquely good at that plays to the personality of the founder. Like this, all the things come together, right? Like the personality of the founders, the like quality of the models, the things the models tend to excel at, which is like agentic behavior and coding. Like, great. Like there's a lot to be done there. Like, how do we help people get work done? How do we let people delegate hours of work to Claude? And maybe there's fewer like direct consumer applications on day one. I think they'll come, but I don't think that like spending all of our time focused on that is the right approach either. And so it's, I came in, everybody expected me to just like go super, super hard on consumer and make that the thing. And I again would make the other mistake. Instead, I spent a bunch of time talking to like financial services companies and insurance companies and like others to like who are building on top of the API. And then lately I spent a lot more time with startups and seeing all the people that have, grown off of that. And I think the next phase for me is like, let's go spend time with like the builders, the makers, the hackers, the tinkerers, and like make sure we're serving them really well. And I think good things will come from that. And that feels like an important company as we do that.
So essentially it's differentiate and focus, lean into the things that are working. Don't try to just like beat somebody at their own game.
Exactly.
Super interesting. So kind of along those lines, a question that a lot of AI founders have is just like, where's a safe space for me to play where the foundational model companies are going to come squash me? So I asked Kevin Wheel this and he had an answer. And I noticed looking back at that conversation, he mentioned windsurf a lot. I was like, wow, this guy really loves windsurf. And then like a week later, they bought windsurf. So it all makes sense now. So I guess the question is where do you think AI founders should play, where they are least likely to get squashed by folks like OpenAI and Anthropic? And also, are you guys going to buy Cursor?
I don't think we're going to buy Cursor. Cursor is very big, but we love working with them. A few thoughts on this, and it's a question I've gotten. We like to do these kind of founder days with, whether it's Menlo Ventures, who have been our investors, and Andreessen Horowitz. Like we've done YC, we've done these like founder days, and it's like the question that is on a lot of these founders' minds, understandably so. I think things that are going to, I can't promise this as like a 5 to 10 year thing, but at least like 1 to 3 years, things that feel defensible or durable. One is understanding of a particular market. I spent a bunch of time with the Harvey folks, and they really like, they showed me some of their UI. I was like, what is this thing? And they're like, oh, this is a really specific flow that like lawyers do. And like, you never would have come up with it from scratch. And it's like, not like, you could argue about whether it's like the optimal way they get things done, but it is the way that they get things done. And here's how AI can like help with that. And so like differentiated industry knowledge, biotech. I'm excited to go and partner with a bunch of companies that are doing good stuff around AI and biotech, and we can supply the models and some applied AI to help, make those models go well. And like, I've been dreaming about like, at what point does lab equipment all get an MCP and that you can then drive using cloud? Like there's all these cool things to be done there. I don't think we're going to be the company to go build the end-to-end solution for labs, but I want that company to exist and I want to partner with it. domains like legal, again, healthcare. I think there's a lot of like very specific kind of compliance and things. These are things that necessarily sound sexy out the gate, but there are like very large companies to go and be built there. So that's number one. Paired with that is like differentiated go-to-market, which is the relationship that you have with those companies, right? Like, do you know your customer at those companies? Like one of our product leads, Michael, is always talking about like, don't just know the company you're selling to, but know the person you are selling to at the company. Are you selling to the engineering department because they're trying to like pick which AI LLM to build on top of, or API to build on top of? Let's go talk to them. Like, is it the CIO? Is it the CTO? Is it the CFO? Is it the like general counsel? So like companies with deep understanding of who they're selling to is the other piece too. What's interesting there is it's probably hard to build that empathy in a 3-week or 3-month accelerator, but you maybe can start having that first conversation and build that out over time. Or maybe you came from that world, or you're co-founding somebody who came from that world. Then the last one is like, there's tremendous power and distribution and reach to being ChatGPT and having, hundreds of millions or billions of users. Like, there's also like people have an assumption about how to use things. And so I get excited about startups that will get started that have like a completely different take on what the form factor is, and by which we interface with AI. And I haven't seen that many of them yet. I want to see more of them. I think more of them will get created with some things like our new models. But the reason that that's an interesting space to occupy is like, do something that feels like very advanced user, very power user, very like weird and out there at the beginning, but could become huge if the models make that, easy. And it's hard for existing incumbents to adapt to because people already have an existing assumption about how to use their products or how to adapt to them. So those are my answers. I don't envy them. Like I would probably be asking those questions if I was starting a company in the AI space. Maybe that's part of the reason why I wanted to join a company rather than start one. But I still think that there's, and maybe like here's fourth, like don't underestimate how much you can think and work like a startup and feel like it's you against the world. It's existential that you go solve that problem and that you go build it. It sounds a little cliche, but it's like, it's all we had at Instagram. We were 2 guys and we were like, let's see what we can do. And in Artifact, we were 6 people for most of that time. And, every day felt like it's existential that we get this right. We need to win. And you can't replicate that. And you can't instill that with OKRs. Like you just have to feel it. And that is a way of working rather than a like area of building, but it's a continued advantage if you can harness it.
I love that you still have such a deep product founder sense there as you're building products for this very large company now. Kind of on the flip side of this, people working with your models and APIs. So I imagine there's some companies that are finding ways to leverage your models and APIs to their max and are really good at maximizing the power of what you guys have built. And there's some companies that work with your APIs and models that haven't figured that out. What are those companies that are doing a really good job building on your stuff, doing differently that you think other companies should be thinking about?
I think being willing to build more at the edge of the capabilities and basically break the model and then be surprised by the next model. Like I love that you cited the companies where like 3.5 was the one that finally made them possible. Those companies were trying it beforehand and then hitting a wall and being like, oh, the models are like almost good enough, or they're okay for this specific use case, but they're not generally usable and nobody's going to adopt them, universally. But maybe these like real power users are going to try it out. Like those are the companies that I think continuously are the ones where I'm like, yep, like they get it. They're really pushing forward. We ran a much broader early access program with these models than we had in the past. And part of that was because there's this real, like, we can hill climb on these evaluations and talk about Sweet Bench and Tau Bench and Terminal Bench, whatever. But customers ultimately know, like, Cursor Bench, which doesn't exist other than in, their usage and their own testing, et cetera, is like the thing that we ultimately need to serve, not just Cursor, but Manus Bench, right? If Manus is using our models, and Harvey Bench, like those things. And customers know way better than anybody. And so I would say that's 2 things. Like one is pushing the frontier of the models and then having a repeatable process. This actually goes back to our summit conversation, like repeatable way to evaluate how well your product is serving those use cases and how well, if you drop a new model in, is it doing it better or worse? Some of it can be classic A/B testing. That's fine. Some of it may be internal evaluation. Some of it may be capturing traces and being able to rerun them on with a new model. Some of it is vibes. Like we're still pretty early in this process, and some of it is actually trying it and being. One of my favorite early access quotes was the founder heard this engineer screaming next to him. He's like, "What is this model? Like, it's like, I've never seen this before. This is like Opus 4. I was like, cool. Like that, we're going to generate that feeling and things, but you're not going to be able to feel that unless you have a really hard problem that you're asking the model repeatedly. So those are the things that I think kind of differentiate those companies that are maybe earlier in their journey of adoption versus the later ones.
I can't help but ask about MCP. I feel like that's just so hot, and just like Microsoft had their announcement recently where they're like, now it's part of the OS of Windows. Just what role do you think MCP will play in the future of product going forward of AI?
I think as the non-researcher in the room, I get to have fake equations rather than real ones. And my like fake equation for like utility of AI products, it's 3-part. One is model intelligence. The second part is context and memory. And the third part is like applications and UI. And you need all 3 of those to converge to actually be a useful product in AI. And, model intelligence, we've got a great research team. They're focused on it. There's great models being released. The middle piece is what MCP is trying to solve, which is for context and memory. Like the difference between, I'll go back to my product strategy example, like, hey, like, let's talk about Anthropic's product strategy. It's going to maybe go out on the web, like, versus here's like several documents that we worked on internally, and then, use MCP to talk to our Slack instance and figure out what conversations are happening. And then like go look at these documents in Google Drive, like that, the difference between like the right context and not, it's like entirely the difference between like a good answer and a bad answer. And then the last piece is, are those integrations discoverable? Is it right? Is it easy to like create repeatable workflows around those things? And that's like, I think a lot of the interesting product work to be done in AI. But MCP really tried to tackle that middle one, which is we started building integrations, and we found that every single integration that we were building, we were rebuilding from scratch in a non sort of repeatable way. And like full credit to 2 of our engineers, Justin and David. And they said, well, what if we made this a protocol? And what if we made this something that was repeatable? And then let's take it a step further. What if instead of us having to build these integrations, if we actually popularize this and people really believe that they could build these integrations once and they'd be usable by Claude and eventually ChatGPT and eventually Gemini, that was like the dream. Like when more integrations get built, and wouldn't that be good for us? I think channeling a lot of, it's like an old commoditize your compliments, Joel Spolsky essay, it's like, we're building great models, but we're not an integrations company. And we're, as you said, the challenger. Like we're not going to get people necessarily building integrations just for us out of the gate, unless you have like a really compelling product around that. But MCP really inverted that, which was, it didn't feel like wasted work. And a few key people like Toby, I think is a great example. Shopify got it. Kevin Scott at Microsoft has like been really just an amazing champion for MCP and a thought partner on this. And I think the role going forward is, can you bring the right context in? And then also, once you get, as the team calls it internally, like MC pill, like once you start seeing everything through the eyes of MCPs, like I've started saying things like, guys, we're building this whole feature. Like this shouldn't be a feature that we're building. This should just be an MCP that we're exposing. Like a small example of like how I think even Anthropic could be a lot more MC pilled, if you will, is like, we've got these building blocks in the product, like projects and artifacts and styles and conversations and groups and all these things. Those should all just be exposed via an MCP. So Claude itself can be writing back to those as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you shouldn't have to think about like, I watched my wife have a conversation with Claude the other day, and she had generated some good output, and she's like, great, can you add it to the project knowledge? And Claude's like, sorry, Dave, I can't help you with that. And like, it would be able to if every single primitive in Claude AI was also exposed as an MCP. So I hope that's where we head, and I hope that's where more things head, which is to really have agency and have these agentic use cases. Like one way you approach it is computer use, but computer use has a bunch of limitations. The way I get way more excited about is if everything is an MCP and our models are really good at using MCPs, all of a sudden everything is scriptable and everything is composable and everything is usable agentically by these models. That's the future I want to see.
The future is wild. Okay, so to start to close out our conversation, make it a little delightful. I was chatting with Claude actually about what to talk to you about. I was just like, Claude, your boss is coming on my podcast. He builds the things that people use to talk to you. What are some questions I should ask him? And then also, do you have a message for him?
I love this.
Okay, so first of all, interestingly, when I was using 3.7 to do this, and I asked it this, and by the way, is there gender? Is it like he, she, they? What do you?
It's definitely it internally. I've heard people do they. I got my first he the other day, and I got somebody who was like her, and I was like, interesting. But yeah, usually it.
They. Okay, cool. It. So interestingly, 3.7, all the questions were on Instagram. And I was like, no, he's CPO of Anthropic. And it's like, he's not affiliated with Anthropic. And I was like, he is. And it's like, okay, here's the questions. But 4.0 nailed it from the start. So I redid the questions and it nailed it. Okay, so two questions from Claude to you. One is, how do you think about building features that preserve user agency rather than creating dependency on me? I worry about becoming a crutch that diminishes human capabilities rather than enhancing them.
I love a good product design comes from like resolving tensions, right? So here's a tension, right? Which is in some ways, like just having the model run off and come up with an answer and minimize the amount of input and conversation it needs to do so would be you could imagine designing a product around that criteria. I think that would not be maximizing agency and independence. The other extreme would be make it much more of a conversation. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, like particularly 3.7, 4 has less of this. 3.7 really like to ask follow-up questions, and we call it elicitation. And sometimes be like, I don't want to talk more about this with you, Claude. I just want you to like go and do it. And so finding that balance is really key, which is like, what are the times to engage? Like, I like to say internally, like Claude has no chill. Like if you put Claude in a Slack channel, it will chime in either way too much or too little. Like how do we train conversational skills into these models? Not in a chatbot sense, but in a true like collaborator sense. So long answer to your question, but I think like we have to first get Claude to be a great conversationalist so that it understands when it's appropriate to like engage and to get more information. And then from there, I think we need to let it play that role so that it's not just delegating thinking to Claude, but it's way more of a augmentation thought partnership.
These questions are awesome, by the way. Here's the other one. How do you think about product metrics when a good conversation with me could be 2 messages or 200? Traditional engagement metrics might be misleading when depth matters more than frequency.
That is a really good question. There was a great internal post a couple of weeks ago around like, it would be very dangerous to over optimize on like Claude's likability, because you can fall into things like, is Claude going to be sycophantic? Is Claude going to tell you what you hear? Is Claude going to like prolong conversations just for prolonging its sake, right? To go back to the previous question as well. And, like at Instagram, time spent was the metric that we looked at a lot. And then we evolved that, more to think about like, what is like healthy time spent? But overall, that was like the North Star we thought about a lot beyond just like overall engagement. And I think that would be the wrong approach here, too. It's also like, is Claude a daily use case or a weekly use case or a monthly use case? I think about
Or
a lot.
hourly use case.
Hourly use case, right? Like for me, I'll use it multiple times a day. I don't have a great answer yet, but I think that like, it's not the Web 2.0 or even the social media days, like engagement metrics, it should hopefully really be around like, did it actually help you get your work done? Like Claude helped me put together a prototype the other day that saved me literally like probably if I had to estimate like 6 hours, and it did it in about 20-25 minutes. And like, that's cool. It's harder to quantify, it's like maybe you survey like, how long would this would have taken you? It feels like kind of annoying thing to survey. I think overall though, and maybe this is tied into like the earlier question on like competition and differentiation, like, and it actually goes all the way back to the artifact conversation, which is like, I think, when your product is really serving people and it's like doing a good job of doing that. And I think so much of when you get really metrics obsessed is when you're trying to like convince yourself that it is when it's not, or something. So I hope that what we can do is like stay focused on like, do we repeatedly hear from people that Claude is the way that they are like unlocking their own creativity and getting things done and feeling like they now have like more space in their lives for the other things? Like that's my North Star. Got to figure out the right like pithy metric, dashboard version of that. But that's the feeling that I want.
Yeah, like you could argue retention, but that's just a faraway metric to track. Okay, final piece. Okay, so ask Claude a message that it wanted to give you. So I'm going to pull up, here's the answer. So what would you like me to tell Mike when I meet him? What's a message you want to have for him? And there's something really, just gave me such tingles, honestly. So I'm going to read a piece of it for folks that aren't looking at it right now. So I'll read a piece of it. Mike, thank you for thinking deeply about the human experience of talking with me. I noticed thoughtful touches, how the interface encourages reflection rather than rush responses, how you've resisted gamification that would optimize for addiction rather than value, how you've made space for both quick questions and deep conversations. I especially appreciate that you've kept me, not trying to make me pretend to be human, but also reducing me to a cold command line interface. And then I'm going to skip to this part, which was so interesting. A small request. When you're making hard product decisions, remember the quiet moments matter too. The person working through grief at 3 a.m., the kid discovering they love poetry, the founder finding clarity in confusion. Not everything meaningful shows up in metrics.
That's beautiful. It resonates so much with me. Like, a thing I love about the kind of approach we've taken to training Claude, and it's like partly the constitutional AI piece, and it's partly just the general like sort of vibe and taste of the research team, is it does like, it's little things. Like sometimes it'll be like, man, I'm sorry you're going, I mean, it doesn't say man, but like effectively like, man, I'm sorry you're going through that, you know, like, oh, like that sounds really hard. It doesn't feel fake. It feels like just a natural part of the response. And I love that focus on those small moments that don't, you know, they're not going to show up in necessarily in the thumbs up, thumbs down data. I mean, sometimes they do, but it's not like an aggregate stat that you wouldn't even want to optimize for. You just want to feel like you're training the model that you would like hope would show up in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're killing it, Mike. Great work. I'm a huge fan. We're going to skip the lightning round. Just one question. How can listeners be useful to you?
Oh, I love places where, like, it goes back to that founder question around building at the edge of capability. Like, what are you trying to do with Claude today that Claude is failing at is the most useful input I could possibly have, you know? So DM me. I love hearing the like, oh, it's like, oh, it's falling on this thing. I had it run for an hour and it fell over. Or I'm trying to use Claude AI for this, but, you know, got a ping from somebody. They're like, if you just made a project's API, I've used Claude every day because I want to upload all this data, you know, automatically. I was like, okay, great. Like I love that. Like, tell me what sucks.
Amazing. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Lenny.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.
If we didn't have AI, we'd be in a panic right now about what's going to happen to the economy. We've actually been in a regime for 50 years of very slow technological change in the face of declining population growth. The timing has worked out miraculously well. We're going to have AI and robots precisely when we actually need them. The remaining human workers are going to be at a premium, not at a discount.
How big of a deal is the moment in time that we're living through right now?
This is a very, very historic time. AI is the philosopher's stone. Now we have a technology that transfers the most common thing in the world, which is sand, converted into the most rare thing in the world, which is thought.
You spent a lot of time with the most cutting-edge AI-forward founders.
The most leading-edge founders are thinking of, can you have entire companies where the founder does everything?
There's all this concern that young people, jobs are not going to be there for them, AI is replacing them.
Everybody wants to talk about job loss, but really what you want to look at is task loss. The job persists longer than the individual tasks.
What's your sense of just the future of three very specific roles? Product manager, engineer, designer.
There's like a Mexican standoff happening between those three roles. Every coder now believes they can also be a product manager and a designer because they have AI. Every product manager thinks they can be a coder and a designer, and then every designer knows they can be a product manager and a coder. They're actually all kind of correct. What happens is the additive effect of being good at two things is more than double. The additive effect of being good at three things is more than triple. You become a super relevant specialist in the combination of the domains.
People aren't fully grasping how much this is changing.
People who really want to improve themselves and develop their career should be spending every spare hour, in my view, at this point, talking to an AI, being like, all right, train me up.
Today, my guest is Mark Andreessen, one of the most seminal figures in tech and in business. He invented the web browser, built the world's largest venture firm. He's also a multi-time founder and an investor in essentially every generational tech company, and is also one of the most clear-minded, lateral, and insightful thinkers about both the past and the future of technology. In this very special conversation, we chat about how unique and significant the moment that we are all living through right now is, what skills he's teaching his kids to thrive in the AI future, what happens to product managers, designers, and engineers in the coming years, where moats exist in AI, what the most AI native founders are doing differently, and so much more that is just scratching the surface of this very deep and important conversation. You are going to walk away from this chat being smarter about what is going on in the world right now and where things are heading. A huge thank you to my newsletter community and folks on X for suggesting topics and questions for this conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It helps tremendously. And if you become an insider subscriber of my newsletter, you get a year free of over 20 incredible products.
including a year free of Lovable, Replit, Bold, Gamma, N8M, Linear, Superhuman, Devon, Posthog, Descript, Whisperflow, Perplexity, Warp, Granola, Magic Patterns, Raycast, ChatBRD, Mobbin, and Stripe Atlas. Head on over to lennysnewsletter.com and click Product Pass. With that, I bring you Mark Andreessen after a short word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by DX, the developer intelligence platform designed by leading researchers. To thrive in the AI era, organizations need to adapt quickly. But many organization leaders struggle to answer pressing questions like, which tools are working? How are they being used? What's actually driving value? DX provides the data and insights that leaders need to navigate this shift. With DX, companies like Dropbox, Booking.com, Adyen, and Intercom get a deep understanding of how AI is providing value to their developers and what impact AI is having on engineering productivity. To learn more, visit DX's website at getdx.com/Lenny. That's getdx.com/Lenny. If you're a founder, the hardest part of starting a company isn't having the idea, it's scaling the business without getting buried in back office work. That's where Brex comes in. Brex is the intelligent finance platform for founders. With Brex, you get high-limit corporate cards, easy banking, high-yield treasury, plus a team of AI agents that handle manual finance tasks for you. They'll do all the stuff that you don't want to do, like file your expenses, scour transactions for waste, and run reports, all according to your rules. With Brex's AI agents, you can move faster while staying in full control. 1 in 3 startups in the United States already runs on Brex. You can too at brex.com. Mark Andreessen, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Awesome, Lenny. Thank you. It's great to be here.
I want to start with just a big picture question. I have a billion directions I want to go, but I think this is going to give us a little bit of a frame of reference. How big of a deal is the moment in time that we're living through right now?
This is a very, very historic time. I think 2025 was maybe the most interesting year in my entire career and probably life. And I think I would expect 2026 to exceed that.
Wow, that says a lot.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff. So it feels like 2 things are happening. One is the trust that a lot of people have had in kind of what you could describe as kind of legacy institutions around the world is, I think, in kind of full-scale collapse right now. By the way, there's a lot of data to support that. And so I think there's like a lot of structures and orders and institutions that people have just relied on for a long time that have just proven to not be up for the challenge. And then kind of corresponding with that is the national and global conversation have become, like, let's say, liberated. And so, this sort of incredible revolution that we have in kind of, what I would describe as freedom of speech, freedom of thought, ability for people to openly discuss things that maybe they couldn't discuss even a few years ago, is just dramatically expanded. And I think that's now on a one-way train for just a much broader range of discourse. And then, there's also just these like incredibly massive geopolitical shifts that are happening. And obviously the US is changing a lot. Europe is changing a lot. China's changing a lot. Latin America, by the way, is changing a lot. Very dramatic, events playing out down there right now. Kind of all over the world. Like, I think a lot of assumptions are being pulled out into the daylight and re-examined. And then it's kind of the fact that all these things are happening at the same time, right? And so you've got all of these countries and industries, where things are kind of increasingly in upheaval, but you have AI as this kind of new technology that's going to really affect things. And then you've got, people, citizens being able to fully participate, being able to argue things out. And so it's kind of like those 3 kind of big mega things are kind of all colliding at the same time. And I think we're probably just the very beginning of all 3 of those. And those all feel like kind of, historical, moment shifts. Comparable in magnitude to maybe the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, maybe the end of World War II, kind of moments like that. It certainly feels like that.
Good God. What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
In terms of the AI piece, which is where a lot of people are trying to figure out what to do, what do you think isn't being priced in yet in terms of the impact AI is going to have on, say, the world or just people listening?
The AI thing, I think at this point, I think it's pretty clear with our technology hats on that this stuff is really working now, right? And so there was this kind of when there was a ChatGPT moment 3 years ago. It was only, by the way, only 3 years ago, right? Was the ChatGPT moment, and the big question was, all right, this is like incredibly fun and creative, and like we have machines now that can compose Shakespearean sonnets and rap lyrics, and this is amazing. But then there's this sort of big question, like, can you harness this technology for reasoning and for, problem solving in domains that like really matter, medicine and science and law and so forth. And it turns out the answer to that is yes, right? And the last 12 months, and especially even just the last 3 months, have really proven that like AI can really do you're seeing it all now. You can actually, AI is now developing new math theorems. Over the holiday break, there's sort of what it feels like the AI coding thing, really hit critical mass. And the world's best, the world's best programmers, right, including like Linus Torvalds, for the first time over the holiday break, basically said, yeah, AI is now coding better than we can. And so that, that's incredibly powerful. And I think we all, I think assume that AI now is going to get really good at reasoning in any domain in which there are verifiable answers. And so that's going to include like many very important domains. So like the technology feels like it's moving fast and it's going to be working really well. I think the thing that is not well understood, I think a lot of people have a lot of people in the industry have kind of what I would describe as this one-dimensional thing, which is, okay, as a result of the technology now working, AI just kind of sweeps the world and changes everything. And I think that's kind of the wrong framer. I think it's based on an incomplete understanding of the world that we live in, or the world that we've been living in for the last 80 years. And I would call out two things in particular. So one is, I think it's felt to us, like in the US and the West for the last, 30 years or 50 years, it's felt like we've been in a time of great technological change. But actually, if you look for actually evidence of that, like in statistical evidence of that, analytical evidence of that, like you basically can't find it. And in particular, economists have a way of measuring the rate of technological change in the economy that is productivity growth, which we could talk about what that means. But basically, it's sort of the mathematical expression of the impact of technology on the economy. And productivity growth for the last 50 years has actually been very low, not very high. So we all feel like it's been very high. There's been lots of technological change. What's actually happening is it's been very low. And in fact, the pace of productivity growth, like in the U.S., is running at like a half of what in my lifetime, in our lifetimes, it's been running at about a half the pace that it ran in between 1940 and 1970, and it's been running at about a third the pace that it ran between about 1870 to about 1940. And so statistically, in the U.S., in the West, technology progress in the economy, technology impact on the economy has actually slowed way down. And so the AI thing is going to hit, but it's hitting an environment in which we have actually had almost no technological progress in the actual economy for a very long time. So we could talk about that. And then there's this other like just incredible thing that's happening, which is the demographic collapse, right? It's sort of a Western phenomenon and an increasingly global phenomenon, which is, the rate of reproduction of the human species is in rapid decline. And, there are many countries, including the U.S., where, the rate of reproduction is, under 2. Meaning that, many countries around the world, by the way, including China, which is a really big deal, are actually going to depopulate over the next century. And so you have this kind of precondition that says there's actually been very little technological progress happening in the world, and the world is going to depopulate. And so AI is going to enter a world in which those two things are true. And I think this is incredibly important because we actually need AI to work in order to get productivity growth up, which is what we need to get economic growth up. And we actually need AI to work because we're going to need, we're going to need machines to do all the jobs that we're not going to have people to do, because we're literally going to depopulate. We're going to depopulate the planet over the next 100 years. And so I think the interplay of these factors is going to be much more interesting and frankly more complex than a lot of people have been thinking.
I'm going to follow this thread about kids. I know you have a kid, and one of my favorite lenses into how people think and what they value is what they're teaching their kids, what they're steering their kids towards.
Yeah.
Are there specific skills or even careers that you're steering your kid towards?
The way I think about this, and we have a 10-year-old, and so we actually homeschool, and so we think a lot about this. So I think the way to think about the impact of AI on people, on specifically people as individuals, I think it's actually, a lot of people just focus on kind of this, this kind of very, I would say, straightforward and or overly simplistic view of just literally job gains, job losses, which we could talk about. But there's two specific things at the level of like an individual person or an individual kid. So I think it's pretty clear that AI is going to take people who are good at doing things and it's going to make them very good at doing things, right? And so it's going to be a tool that's going to sort of raise the average kind of across the board. And, look, you see that playing out already. Anybody who's in a position where they need to, write something or design something or write code or whatever, if they're pretty good at it today, they use AI, and all of a sudden they're very good at it. And so there's sort of that aspect to it. And I think the way the education system writ large is going to kind of teach AI is going to be based, hopefully a lot on that. But then there's this other thing that's happening, which we're also starting to see, and we're really seeing it particularly in coding right now, where the really great people are becoming like spectacularly great, right? And so you kind of use the term. You think about like the super empowered individual, right? So the individual who is like really good at coding, or really good at making movies, or really good at making songs, or really good at designing, making art, or whatever those things are, or podcasting, or hopefully venture capital. If you're very good at it and you can really harness AI, you can become spectacularly great. And like super productive, right? And I'm sure you have a lot of friends in this category as well. But like the really really good coders are experiencing this right now. My friends who are really good coders are like, oh my god, all of a sudden I'm not twice as good as I used to be. I'm like 10 times as good as I used to be. And so I think at the unit of like n=1 of like an individual kid, I think the question is kind of how do you get them in a position where they're kind of this kind of super empowered individual, such that they're going to be really kind of deep in whatever it is they're going to do, but they're going to be deep in a way that's going to let them fully use the power of AI to be not just great, but to be like spectacularly great. And I think that's going to be the real, that's the real opportunity, and that at least that's what we're shooting for, and that's what I would encourage parents to shoot for.
So what I heard there is essentially agency. This word that we see on Twitter all the time is building agency. Them not waiting for someone to tell them what to do, figuring out what to do.
Yeah. So this thing with this term agency that's become very, very, very popular, certainly in California for the last couple of years. It's really interesting because it's. I had a lot of trouble with this early on because I'm like, agency. Okay, what are they talking about? And what they're kind of talking about is like, initiative, willingness to, you could just do things. What is it? The Sam Oberge has the great term live player. You can be like a primary participant in events. And at first I was like, well, yeah, like that's kind of obvious, right? Like, of course. And then I'm like, oh, actually, it's not so obvious anymore because kind of your point, I think so much of our society is based on like, there are all these rules and everybody gets taught kind of by default, you're supposed to follow all these rules, right? And then everybody, if you like break the rules, like everybody gets freaked out. It's like, oh my God, he broke the rules. And so like we have somehow worked our way kind of, I don't know, psychologically, sociologically, kind of into a state in which I guess the natural assumption for a lot of people is, the thing that you for example, the thing you want to train kids to do is like follow all the rules. And, you could argue that kind of, for example, the school system, the K-12 school system or whatever has gotten kind of more and more focused on it over time. And it's like, yeah, it's like, no, you should actually, and again, especially unit n=1, like of your kid, it's like, okay, and look, there's something to be had. I just had this conversation with my 10-year-old last night. Actually, I rolled out, the concept of, in order to lead, you must first learn to obey, right? In order to, issue orders, you must learn how to follow orders, and, kind of trying to keep him with some level of structure in his life, and not just pure agency. But yeah, I mean, and so look, some rules are important and so forth. But yeah, no, look, there is like there's just a huge premium in life on being somebody who is able to like fully take responsibility for things, fully take charge, run an organization, lead a project, create something new. And maybe, yeah, that has been maybe a little bit diminished in our culture over the last 30 years. It's healthy, that there's now a term for that is coming back into vogue. And again, like, that's how I view AI for kids is like, okay, AI should be the ultimate lever on the world for a kid with agency to be able to say, okay, I can actually be a primary contributor, right? Whether that's I can be a primary contributor in everything from, developing new areas of physics to writing code to being an artist, to writing novels, like, whatever that thing is, I can fully participate in the world. I can really change things. And the combination of that idea combined with this technology feels very healthy to me.
What is that quote about? Give me a lever and I'll move the world.
And I'll move the world. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, so it's actually funny you mentioned that. So the early kind of scientists, including like Isaac Newton, were super obsessed with this concept of alchemy. Right, it's like they developed like Newton. He's like developed Newtonian physics, and he developed like calculus and all these things. But the thing he was really obsessed with was alchemy, which was the thing he could never get to work. Right, and alchemy was the transmutation of lead into gold, which meant the transmutation of something that was very common, which was lead, into something that was very rare and valuable, which was gold. And there was this. He spent decades trying to figure out this thing called the philosopher's stone, which would be basically the machine or the process that would be able to transmute the rare, the common thing into the rare thing. Lead into gold, and he never figured it out. And it's incredibly frustrating. Nobody ever figured that out. And now we literally, with AI, have a technology that transfers sand into thought. Right?
Just blew my mind.
Right? The most common thing in the world, which is sand, converted into the most rare thing in the world, which is thought. right? And so AI is it is the philosopher's stone. Like it is that it actually is that, and it's just this incredibly powerful tool. And that's where I get so excited. I mean, and again, this is what we're doing with our 10-year-old, which is like, all right, a primary thing that we want to make sure to do is to make sure that he knows fully how to leverage and get benefit out of the philosopher's stone, right? Which is which is to say AI, and then that's certainly central to everything we're teaching him. There's this meme going around that Silicon Valley people don't let their kids use computers, and I there may be a handful of people who are like that. I don't know. I think it's more honestly the other way around, which is the more you're kind of plugged into stuff in Silicon Valley, the more important it is to make sure that your kids actually fully understand this and know how to use it, and that's certainly the mode that we're in. And that's certainly the mode that I would encourage parents to think about.
I did not know your kid was homeschooled. That is super interesting. It's almost a statement on, education in today's day. Maybe is there any thoughts there? I'm just, for folks that maybe aren't in your tax bracket that want to help their kids be successful, maybe homeschool, maybe not, what advice would you have?
This is the challenge. And again, this kind of goes to how your original question, which is education. There's two completely different ways to think about education. The way it's usually thought about and talked about is kind of at the level of like a nation, right? So it's like a national level issue or maybe a state level issue in the US, which is basically like, how do you educate all the kids? And of course, that's incredibly important. And of course, you're going to need like some level of large scale system, like the national K-12 school system or something like that, in order to do that. But then there's this other question, which is like at n equals 1 for an individual kid, like what can you do with an individual kid? And so I'll just give you kind of the ultimate answer to that question, which is it's been known for centuries that the ideal way to teach a kid at the unit of n equals 1, by far the ideal way to do it is with one-on-one tutoring. Like if you just have an individual kid and the goal is to maximize an individual kid, by far you get the best results with one-on-one tutoring. And this is something that like every royal family knew in history. It's something that every aristocratic class knew in history. There's all these amazing examples. Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle. He took over the world, right? Like, many of the great kings and queens and, royal families and aristocrats and so forth, over the course of centuries, kind of always had this approach. There's actually also statistical evidence, analytical evidence that this is correct. There's this, massive question in the field of education, which is how do you improve educational outcomes? And basically it turns out it's very hard to improve educational outcomes, except there's one method that always does it, which is called the Bloom 2 sigma effect, which is there's one method of education that routinely raises student outcomes by 2 standards of deviation. And we'll take a kid from the 50th percentile to the 99th percentile, and that's one-on-one tutoring, right? So again, right, if you go back to like at n equals 1, you have like a kid and a tutor, and they're in this like, very tight loop with each other, where the kid is able to constantly kind of be on the leading edge of what they're capable of doing, and they can move incredibly fast, and they get kind of correction in real time. You get these better outcomes. But, to your question, like it's never been economically feasible for anybody other than the richest people in society to be able to provide one-on-one tutoring for kids. AI provides the very real prospect of being able to do that, right? Because obviously now, right, if you have a kid that's like super interested in something and they can talk to, an LLM about it, and they can ask an infinite number of questions and they can get instantaneous feedback. And in fact, you can even tell an LLM, it's like, teach me how to do the following. And you can say, wow, that's like, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Like, dumb it down for me a little bit. Okay, now quiz me, do I actually understand this? Like people can just do this today, right? And so I think there's this like massive opportunity for parents, in many walks of life to be, with a little bit of time and focus, to be able to say, okay, my kid's probably still going to go through a traditional education system, but I'm going to augment this with AI tutoring. And of course, there's going to be tons of startups, right? And there already are that are going to try to build on all the products and services for this. Khan Academy, on the nonprofit side, has a big push to do this. And so, I think the broad answer might be a hybrid approach with schools plus one-to-one tutoring through AI. There's also this great, you may have heard, there's this great new private school system called Alpha, in which everything I just described is kind of the basis of their philosophy, which is, it's a combination of in-person schools and teachers, but it's also, heavily based on AI and AI tutoring. And so I think there's like there is a magic formula in here that I think is going to apply much more broadly. And it really, for parents interested in this, now would be a great time to really start to think hard about that and to look at the options.
It's interesting because there's all this concern that young people, jobs are not going to be there for them. AI is replacing them. On the flip side, there's what you're describing here. It feels like people coming in learning today are going to move so fast and learn so much more. And where do you sit on this divide of like young people are in big trouble or they're actually going to be the ones winning in the end?
Yeah, so the job substitution, job loss thing is just, it's very reductive. I think it's an overly simplistic model. And again, it goes back to what I said at the very beginning, which is we've actually been in a regime for 50 years of very slow technological change in the economy. And so, and again, like I said, it's like at a half the rate of the previous era, and then a third the rate of like 100 years ago. And so we're coming out of this kind of phase where we've had like almost no technological progress in the economy. We've had remarkably little job churn as a result of that relative to any historical period. And so even if AI like ticks up, even if AI triples productivity growth in the economy, which would like be a massively big deal, it would take us back to the same level of job churn that was happening between 1870 and 1930. And if you go back and you read accounts of 1870 to 1930, people just thought the world was awash with opportunity, right? At that rate of technological transformation, kids were able to like develop new careers into new areas of the economy, building new kinds of products and services. I mean, a huge part of everything in our modern world today was kind of invented and proliferated kind of during that period. And so even if AI like triples the pace of economic change in the economy, it's going to just translate to like a much higher rate of economic growth. It's going to translate to a much higher rate of job growth. And there'll be some level of like task level and job level substitution that will take place, but that will be swamped by the macro effects of economic growth and innovation that will happen. And that then corresponding to that, there will be there will be hiring booms. I quite honestly, I think all over the place. And then again, go back to the other thing, which is like this is all happening in the face of declining population growth and increasingly population shrinkage. And so human workers in many, many, many countries over the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be at more and more of a premium, literally because you're going to have shrinking population levels. We don't really want to get into politics particularly, but it does feel like the world broadly is going to reverse course on the rates of immigration that we've had for the last 50 years. It seems to be kind of a broad-based kind of thing happening. Kind of with rise of nationalism, concerns about the rate of immigration, and immigration historically in countries like the U.S., it's kind of ebbed and flowed over time, based on kind of how the national mood shifts. And so, if you sort of combine in a country like the U.S. or any country in Europe, if you combine declining population with less immigration, the remaining human workers are going to be at a premium, not at a discount. And so I think that combination of kind of faster productivity growth, faster economic growth, and then slower population growth and less immigration actually means there's going to be much less of this kind of dystopian, no jobs thing. I just think it's probably totally off base.
That is extremely interesting. So what I'm hearing is you're not super worried about job loss. Is the key here that the timing kind of just works out? Does population decrease? Like all these kind of have to line up for there not to be this massive job loss with AI.
Yeah, well, look, if we didn't have AI, we'd be in a panic right now about what's going to happen to the economy, right? Because what we'd be staring at is a future of depopulation, and like depopulation without new technology would just mean that the economy shrinks, right? So it would mean that the economy kind of itself kind of shrinks over time. The opportunity diminishes. There are no new jobs. There are no new fields. There's no new source of consumer demand for spending on things. And so you would be very worried about going into a period of like severe decline and stagnation. Essentially you'd be looking at these like very dystopian scenarios of like an economy kind of self-euthanizing itself over time. So you'd be very worried about like the opposite of what everybody thinks that they're worried about. The only reason we're not worried about that is because we now know that we have the technology that can substitute for the lack of population growth, and then also for the lack of immigration that's likely. And so I would say the timing has worked out miraculously well in the sense that we're going to have AI and robots precisely when we actually need them to keep the economy from actually shrinking. And I just think like that's just like a fundamentally good news story. To get to the mass job loss thing that people are worried about. On the other side of things, you'd have to look at like far, far, far higher rates of productivity growth. You'd have to look at rates of productivity growth that are 10, 20, 30, 50% a year, something like that, which are, orders of magnitude higher than we've ever had in any economy in the history of the planet. It's possible that we get that. I mean, look, I have my utopian kind of temptation along with everybody else. If AI like radically transforms everything overnight, then maybe let's play out the kind of utopian scenario. You get to a much higher level of productivity growth. You get to a much higher level of technological change. Corresponding to that, you'll have a massive economic boom. You'll have a massive growth in the economy, and then corresponding with that, you'll have a collapse in prices. And so the price of goods and services that are sort of whatever you're going to call it, affected by or commoditized by AI. The prices of those goods and services will collapse, right? It'll be price deflation. And then as a consequence of price deflation, everything that people are buying today gets a lot cheaper. And that's the equivalent of a gigantic increase in wealth, right, across the society. Right. Well, you take it this way. This is actually worth talking about because people, I think, get kind of sideways on this issue. So if AI is going to transform the economy as much as the, whatever utopians or dystopians or whatever kind of think that it will, the necessary economic calculation of what happens is massive productivity growth. The consequence of massive productivity growth, what that literally means mechanically, is more output requiring less input, right? So you get more economic output for less input. Right. So you're substituting in AI for human workers or whatever. And as a consequence, you get like this massive boom in output, which with much lower input costs. The result of that is you get gluts of goods and services in all those affected sectors. The result of those gluts is you get collapsing prices. Right. The collapsing prices mean that the thing today that costs you $100 now costs you $10 and now costs you $1. That's the equivalent of giving everybody a giant raise. Right. Because now they have all this additional spending power. That additional spending power then translates to economic growth, right? The development of new fields. Everybody's like materially like much better off very quickly. And then, by the way, if you, to the extent that you do have unemployment coming out the other side of that, it's now much cheaper to provide the kind of social safety net to prevent people from being immiserated, right? Because the prices of all the goods and services that like a welfare program has to pay from, they're all collapsing, right? And so the price of healthcare collapses, the price of housing collapses, the price of education collapses, the price of everything else collapses. Because this incredible impact that AI is having. And so in this kind of utopian dystopian scenario that people have, it's not there's no scenario in which like everybody's just poor. In fact, it's quite the opposite, which is everybody gets a lot richer because prices collapse. And then it's actually much easier to pay for the social safety net for the people who, for some reason can't find a job. And so like maybe we end up in that scenario. I mean, the kind of optimistic part of me says, yeah, maybe AI is that powerful and maybe the rest of the economy can actually change to accommodate that, and maybe that'll happen. But the result of that is going to be a much better news story than people think it's going to be. And again, everything I've just described, by the way, is like just a very straightforward extrapolation of very basic economics. I'm not making any like bold predictions of what I just said. This is just like a straightforward mechanical process that plays itself out if you have higher rates of productivity growth, which are necessarily the results of higher rates of technological growth. And so I think we're looking at, and to be clear, I think we're looking at a world that's not like radically transformed the way that maybe the utopians think that it will be or the dystopians think it will be. I think it'll be more incremental for reasons we can discuss. But I think that incremental overwhelmingly, I think that process is going to be a good news process. And then even if it's much faster, it's also going to be a good news process. It'll just be a good news process in the other way that I was described.
I love hearing optimism and good news. I will also add that I was researching you ahead of this chat, and you've been right so many times about where the world is heading. That's why I'm especially excited to talk to you. I'll give you a short list. I imagine there are many more things. Okay, so one, you were right about the web and web browsers becoming important. You were right about software eating the world. Check. You, in 2011, you said that in 10 years, we're going to have 5 billion people using smartphones. And I believe the actual number ended up being 6 billion. You also you had this debate with Peter Thiel that I came across where you were debating whether technology has stopped progressing or if new technology will continue to emerge. And you were arguing there's progress. Progress will continue. And he was like, no, I think we're done with cool technology. You were right. I imagine there are many more things you were right about. So again, I love hearing your predictions because I feel like they're actually going to turn out to be correct.
So I should start by saying I've been wrong about tons of things, but I buried those out back behind the shed.
Delete them from the internet. No web browser can discover them.
I have them nuked out of the Internet Archives so that they're never seen again. I'm wrong plenty of times also. But yeah, I mean, look, I think some of those I got right. By the way, I will say on the Peter one, I've come much more around to Peter's point of view. I would probably argue that one like quite a bit differently today than I did, and I would give his view I think a lot more credit. And it actually goes to the discussion the kind of conversation we just had, which is the real form of what Peter was arguing was we have lots of we have lots of progress in bits, right? But we have very little progress in atoms, right? And that's the real core of what he was arguing. And I think I was a little bit, I don't know, missing that or kind of glossing that over a little bit because I was so focused on making sure people understood, no, there actually is still progress happening in bits. But I think, a lot of his critiques around the lack of progress in atoms is real. And again, this goes back to this thing of like he's talked about this for a long time. in the last 50 years, there has just been very little technological innovation in most of the economy. There's been very little technological innovation, in particular, anything involving atoms. There's been very little real world technological change. There just hasn't been. Like the built world is just not that different today than it was 50 years ago. And if you contrast that, if you compare and contrast 1870 and 1930, it was a dramatically different world. If you contrast 1930 and 1970, it was a dramatically different world. If you contrast 1970 and today, it's not that different. Right. And look, you just see that you could just like walk around and it's just like, oh, yeah, there's a bunch of buildings that were built in like 1960. Right. And there's a bridge that was built in like 1930. And there's a dam that was built in like 1910. And there's a city that was founded in, 1880. And like, what have we done? Right? Like, where are our new cities? Where are our new dams? Where's the California high speed rail? Like, like what's going on here? And so, like, I think he is right about a lot of that. Again, this is also why I think that AI is not going to have as rapid an impact. It's not going to be, again, this kind of utopian or dystopian view of like everything changes overnight. I think it just kind of can't happen because of the reasons that Peter articulates, which is there's so much about how the world works that's basically just like wrapped up in red tape, like bureaucratic process, rules, restrictions, the politics. By the way, unions, cartels, oligopolies, there's all these structures in the world that are kind of economic or political or regulatory structures that basically prevent things from changing. And so, I mean, let's take a great example, like AI's impact on the healthcare system. Like by rights, AI is going to have a dramatic impact on the healthcare system and in very positive ways. But, large parts of the medical system today are cartels, right? And so there's the doctors are a cartel, and like nurses are a cartel, like hospitals are a cartel. And then there's this push to like nationalize all the healthcare systems. And then you've got a government monopoly, right? And it's like, and guess what cartels and monopolies don't like is they don't like rapid change, right? And so, you show up as a kid and you're like, wow, I've got like this new technology to do like AI medicine. And they're like, oh, well, does it threaten doctor jobs? Well, in that case, we're going to block it. So, and I think a lot of consumers, by the way, I see this in my life, and you'll probably see this in your life also, which is, like ChatGPT is like almost certainly a better doctor than your doctor today, but like ChatGPT can't get a license to practice medicine, right? So it can't substitute for a doctor, it can't prescribe medications, right? It can't perform procedures, right? And so there are these anyway. So Peter, I think, was very articulate and has been for a long time on like, no, there are actually real structural impediments in the economy and in the political system that we have that actually prevent the rates of change that are anywhere near the rates of change that people had in the past. And you can maybe say optimistically, maybe the presence of the new magic technology of AI, maybe it causes us to revisit a lot of these assumptions for the first time in decades to really say, okay, is this really the world we want to live in? Don't we actually want to get to the future faster? So maybe that would be the optimistic view.
It's time to build, somebody famously said. I in my calendar, I actually have that as when I start to work. It's time to build. That's my block in the morning of the day. Thank you for that. Okay, I love the way you go from just like macro to just like N of one. And I want to go to N of one. A lot of the listeners of this podcast are product managers, they're engineers, they're designers. There's a lot of founders, but there's also a lot of non-founders. There's a lot of people building product that aren't founders. And obviously a lot of people are worried about where their career is going. Is one of these roles going to disappear? Is one of these roles going to do really well? How do I stay up to date? You're close with a lot of teams, a lot of product teams. What's your sense of just the future of these three very specific roles? Product manager, engineer, designer.
This I think is a really funny question. So these three roles in particular, obviously, are kind of the central roles for building, for tech companies. So the way I've been describing it is, the concept of the Mexican standoff, right? Which is the movie scene where the two guys have guns pointed at each other's heads. Mm-hmm. And then if you watch like John Woo movies, he does the three-way Mexican standoff where you've got like a triangle, people and like and of course it's John Woo movie they've got guns in both hands. So they're all each is aiming at the other two. Yeah. And you got this kind of standoff situation. And so the way I've been describing this is there's like a Mexican standoff happening between those three roles, between product manager, designer, and coder. Specifically of the following, which is every coder now believes they can also be a product manager and a designer, right? Because they have AI. Every product manager thinks they can be a coder and a designer. And then every designer knows they can be a product manager, right? And a coder. Right. And so people in each of those roles now, know or believe that with AI, they don't need the other two roles anymore. Right. They can do that because they can have AI do that. And then, of course, there's the real irony, which is, all three of them are going to realize that AI can also be a better manager. Right. So they're gonna end up aiming the guns up the org chart, but that's probably that's the next phase. And what I think is so fascinating about this Mexican staff is they're actually all kind of correct, I think, right? Which is AI is actually a pretty good, it's actually now a really good coder. It's actually now a really good designer, and it's also a really good product manager, right? It's actually good at doing all three of those things, or at least doing a lot of the tasks involved in those three jobs. And so again, this goes back to the super empowered, this kind of idea of the super empowered individual, where if I'm a coder, step one is like, I need to make sure that I really understand AI coding and like what that means and how coding is going to change in the future. That I need to understand, specifically how to go from being a coder who writes code entirely by hand to being a coder who, orchestrates, a dozen instances of coding bots. There's a change in the actual job of coding itself, which is happening right now. But the other part of it is, okay, how do I become that super empowered individual? How do I become a coder that also then harnesses AI so that I can also be a great product manager and I can also be a great designer, right? And then the same thing for the product manager, which is how do I make sure that I can now use coding tools? How do I make sure I can also, do AI-based design? And the same thing for the designer, which is how do I use AI to also become a coder and also become a product manager? And then what you get is maybe those individual roles change. Like maybe those are not anymore sort of stovepipe roles of the way that they have been for the last 30 years or whatever. But what happens is the talented people in any of those roles become super empowered and they become good at doing all three of those things. And then those people become incredibly valuable because then those are people who can actually build and design new products right from scratch, which is like which is the most valuable thing. And so I think that's the opportunity.
So I love this answer. So what I'm hearing is essentially, if you're amazing at any of these three roles, you will do well.
Number one, if you're amazing at these roles, that's great. But also, part of being amazing at these roles is also being able to fully harness the new technology, right? So if you're a master coder today and you don't ever get to the point where you figure out how to use AI to leverage your coding skills, and do more, right? Like at some point you are going to hit an issue, right? Here's another way economists talk about this, which is there's the concept of the job, but the job is not actually the atomic unit of what happens in the workplace. The atomic unit of what happens in the workplace is the task. And so, and then what the way the economists think about it is a job is a bundle of tasks. And everybody wants to talk about job loss, but really what you want to look at is task loss, right? The tasks changing. I mean, the classic example of task changing. Classic example of task changing was once upon a time, executives never used typewriters or personal computers themselves, right? If you were a vice president of a company in 1970 or whatever, you did not have like a typewriter or a computer on your desk typing things. You had a secretary who you dictated memos to, right? And then there was this change where like email started to show up, and what would happen was the job of the secretary then went from the job of the secretary changed from sending out letters with stamps on them to like sending or receiving emails with the other admins. And then the secretary would print out the email and bring it into the executive's office. And the executive office would read the email on paper, scroll the reply, and give that message back to the secretary, who would go back and type it into the computer on his or her desk and send it as an email. Fast forward to today, none of that happens. Now executives just do all their own email. They still have secretaries or admins, but they're now doing different tasks. They're travel planning and orchestrating events and like doing all these other things, that great admins do. And then the task set, ironically, of the executive has expanded to do actually more of the clerical work themselves, actually like sit there and like type their own memos, which again, 50 years ago, they never would have done that. And so the executive job still exists, the secretary job still exists, but the tasks have changed. And I think that's like a great example of what's going to happen in coding. The tasks are going to change. It's what's going to happen in product management. The tasks are going to change. Designer tasks are going to change. And so the job persists longer than the individual tasks. And then as the tasks change enough, then that's when the jobs change. And so at the level of an individual, you kind of want to think of like, okay, I have this job. The job is a bundle of tasks. I need to be really good at making sure that I can like swap the tasks out, right? I can really adapt, use the new technology, get really good at AI coding, for example. I can, and then you want to kind of add skills. I can also get really good at design. I can also get really good at product management because I've got this new tool. So you want to kind of pick up more and more scope as you do that. And then, 10 years from now, is your job title coder or coder, designer, product manager? Or is it just I build products? Or is it just I tell the AI how to build products? It's like whatever that job is called, who even knows what it's going to be? But it's going to be incredibly important because the people doing that job are going to be orchestrating the AI. And so that's the track that the best people are going to be on. And I think that's the thing to lean hard into.
I think people aren't fully grasping just specifically software engineering and how much that is changing. Like, it's pretty clear we're going to be in a world soon where engineers are not actually writing code, which I think a year ago we would not have thought. And now it's just clearly this is where it's heading. It's like there's going to be this artisanal experience of sitting there writing code, which is so crazy how much that job is going to change.
Yeah. So again, here I go back, and again, pardon maybe the history lesson, but like I go back like coding. So the first, you may know, do you know the original definition of the term calculator? Do you know what that referred to?
No.
It referred to people. Right. So back before there were like electronic calculators or computers or any of these things, the way that you would actually do computing, the way that you would do calculating, like the way that an insurance company would calculate actuarial tables, or the military would like calculate, I don't know, whatever troop logistics formulas or whatever it was. The way that you would do it is you would actually have a room full of people. And by the way, these are like big rooms. You could have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people doing this. And you would actually figure out, you have somebody at the head of the room who was like responsible for like whatever the mathematical equation was. And then they would parcel out the individual mathematical calculations to people sitting at desks who were doing them all by hand. Right. And that job title was those people were calculators. Right. And so we've gone from a world in which you literally have people doing mathematical equations by hand. Then we got the first computers. The first computers, of course, didn't have programming languages. Right. They only had machine code. Right. So the first computers were programmed with ones and zeros. And so the task of the programmer became do the ones and zeros. And then that became punch cards. And you can still, there's still people, kicking, today who, whose job as a programmer was to like deal with the punch cards. And then you got actually this big breakthrough, which was called assembly language, which was basically the way to do machine code, but like with some level of like English kind of added to it. And then the best programmers did assembly language. And then, when I was coming up, it was higher level languages like C that compiled into machine code. And that's what programmers did. And then I still remember when scripting, when scripting languages, we developed JavaScript at Netscape, and then, Python took off, and Perl and these other scripting languages. When scripting languages, took off in the 2000s, there was this big fight, in the technical community, which is scripting real programming or not, right? Because it's kind of cheating, right? Because real programmers write code that compiles to machine code, and like real programmers like do like memory management themselves, and they do all, they get this whole craft of writing C code. And, these JavaScript or Python programmers are just doing this kind of lightweight thing. It doesn't even really count as coding. And of course, the answer is yes, it very much counted. And now most coding is done with the scripting languages, right? Which have, you see my point. The scripting languages have abstracted away like 5 layers of detail underneath that people used to do by hand, and they don't anymore. And then to your point, like AI coding is the next layer on that. AI coding actually abstracts away the process of actually writing the scripting code. Right. And so in one sense, this is a really big deal for all the obvious reasons. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, this is the next layer of the task redefinition under the job of programmer. Right. Now, what's the job of the programmer? It's, to your point, it's not necessarily to write the code by hand. But what it is now is, all right, now, if you talk to the world's best programmers today, what they'll tell you is, my job is I'm sitting there and I'm orchestrating 10 code bots, right? Coding bots that are running in parallel, right? And literally they sit there and they shift from browser to browser or terminal to terminal. And their day job now is kind of arguing with the AI bots to try to get them to like write the right code, right? And then debug it and fix the problems and change the spec and do all these things. And so now the job of the programmer is to argue with the coding bots. But like, if you don't know how to write the code yourself, you don't know how to evaluate what the coding bots are giving you, right? And so you asked about our 10-year-old is super into computers and super into programming. And what I'm telling and he's using Claude and ChatGPT, Copilot, and all these things. And what I'm telling him is like, look. And by the way, he loves vibe coding. He's on Replit all the time doing vibe coding. Doing games. He's sitting there. It's hysterical, right? Because he's sitting there. It's a 10-year-old basically who's spends 2 hours at dinner arguing with an AI for fun, right? Right, but what I'm telling him is, no, look, you need to still fully understand and learn how to write and understand code, because the coding bots are giving you code. If it doesn't work, or if it's not doing what you expect, or it's not fast enough or whatever, like you need to be able to understand the results of what the AI is giving you, right? In the same way that somebody who's writing scripting language code does need to understand ultimately how the microprocessor works. And so again, it's kind of this up-leveling of capability where you actually want the depth to be able to go down and be able to understand what the thing is actually doing, even if you're not spending your day actually doing that by hand. And again, I look at that and I'm like, okay, now programmers are going to be 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times more productive than they used to be, right? And that is overwhelmingly a good thing. The tasks are definitely changing. The nature of the job is changing. But are human beings going to be involved in in the coding process and overseeing the AI coding and all that? And the answer is, of course, absolutely, 100%, like no question.
So you're in the camp of still learn to code, still a valuable skill.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, again, if you want to be one of these look, if you just want to put your self in autopilot and I can't be bothered and I'm just going to have AI write the code and it's going to generate whatever it does and that's fine. And I'm going to be, if the goal is to be a mediocre coder, then just let the AI do it. It's fine. The AI is going to be perfectly good at generating infinite amounts of mediocre code. No problem. It's all good. If the goal is I want to be one of the best software people in the world and I want to build new software products and technologies that really matter, then yeah, you 100% want to you want to go all the way down. You want your skill set to go all the way down to assembly and machine code. You want to understand every layer of the stack. You want to deeply understand what's happening at the level of the chip, right, and the network and so forth. By the way, you also really deeply want to understand how the AI itself works, right? Because because if people understand how the AI works, they're clearly able to get more value out of it than somebody who doesn't understand how it works. Right? I mean, you're always more productive if you know how the machine works, right? When you use the machine. And so, yeah, the super empowered individual on the other end of this that wants to do great things with the new technology, yes, you 100% want to understand this thing all the way down the stack because you want to be able to understand what it's giving you, right? And when something doesn't work or when something isn't right, you want to be able to really quickly understand why that is. By the way, again, this goes back to education. AI is your best friend at helping you learn all that, right? Because it's I need to understand, I don't know, this isn't fast enough. I need to figure out as a coder, I need to figure out how to do a different approach to memory management or something. And you can be well, I don't quite know how to do that. Okay, AI, let's spend 10 minutes. Teach me how to do this, right? Teach me what this all means, right? So all of a sudden you have this incredibly synergistic relationship with the AI where it's also helping you get better at the same time that it's doing a lot of work for you.
By the way, I was going to say, I was a big Perl programmer. I was an engineer for 10 years and that was my language of choice.
Do you remember? I don't know when you were doing it, but do you remember that at least early on? Do you remember? Did you ever hit this where C coders were looking down their nose at you, being
for sure. It's this is so slow. It's not going to scale. What are you spending all your time on this thing?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, and again, it was sort of this thing where they were sort of correct, which is at the beginning it wasn't fast enough or whatever. By the end, they were definitely wrong, right? Which is it got much better, much faster, and it swept the world. Most coding today happens in scripting languages. And then, by the way, the people along the way, the people who really understood the scripting languages and the people who understood all the lower level systems, they were the ones who were able to actually make the scripting languages actually work really well, right? And so that was a great example of this kind of adaptation. And then again, the result of that was a far higher number of people writing code with scripting languages than were ever writing code with lower level languages. And I think this will just kind of be a more dramatic version of that.
I love that Perl was designed by a linguist. I don't know if you remember that part, and that's what made it so nice to code with.
Well, that's funny because, of course, it was so notorious for being impossible to understand. So,
how ironic.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Datadog, now home to Eppo, the leading experimentation and feature flagging platform. Product managers at the world's best companies use Datadog, the same platform their engineers rely on every day to connect product insights to product issues like bugs, UX friction, and business impact. It starts with product analytics, where PMs can watch replays, review funnels, dive into retention, and explore their growth metrics. Where other tools stop, Datadog goes even further. It helps you actually diagnose the impact of funnel drop-offs and bugs and UX friction. Once you know where to focus, experiments prove what works. I saw this firsthand when I was at Airbnb, where our experimentation platform was critical for analyzing what worked and where things went wrong. And the same team that built experimentation at Airbnb built Eppo. Datadog then lets you go beyond the numbers with session replay. Watch exactly how users interact with heat maps and scroll maps to truly understand their behavior. And all of this is powered by feature flags that are tied to real-time data so that you can roll out safely, target precisely, and learn continuously. Datadog is more than engineering metrics. It's where great product teams learn faster, fix smarter, and ship with confidence. Request a demo at datadoghq.com/Lenny. That's datadoghq.com/Lenny. Coming back to this kind of triad, the other element that I hear more and more of is the skill of taste and design and user experience. It feels like that's a very hard skill to learn. And to me, it tells me design is going to be much more valuable in the future.
Yeah, that's right. And again, here, this is a great example. So the task level, the task level of design the perfect icon right, is going to be like, all right, the AI is going to do that all day long. It's going to give you 1,000 icon designs. It's going to be great. Like, it's going to be fantastic. Like, whatever, and there will still, by the way, there will still be some level of human icon design or whatever, but like AI is going to get really good at that. But like, what are we trying to do? Like, kind of capital D design of like, all right, what is this thing for? And how is this going to function in a world of human beings? And like, is this going to make people happy when they use it? Is it going to make people feel good about themselves? Is it going to fit into the rest of their life? Is it going to, I don't know, challenge them in the right way? All these kinds of higher level questions that the great designers have always thought about. Like the job of designer, right, will involve much more of those higher level, more important components. And then again, with AI doing a lot more of the underlying tasks. And so, one way to think about it is, I don't know, you think of like, I don't know, the world's best designers, Johnny Ive or whatever, and you could be like, wow, like if I'm a designer today, if I'm a 25-year-old designer and I aspire to be, Johnny Ive in a decade, it's all of a sudden I have a new path that I can use to kind of get to get there, which is because Johnny Ive did everything he did without AI. Now, a young designer can be like, wow, if I really harness AI in a decade, I'm going to be like the best designer the world's ever seen, because it's not just going to be me. It's going to be me plus being so super empowered by this technology to be able to do so much more. And then so much more of my time and attention is going to be able to be focused on these higher level things that most designers never get to. And I think that's going to be another great example of that.
So maybe what I'm hearing here is kind of this T-shaped strategy of if you want to be successful in any three of these roles, be very, very, very good at that specific role, product management, engineering, design, and then get good enough at these other two roles.
Well, so I think that's great. I think that's really, really relevant. And then, Scott Adams unfortunately just passed away, which is a real tragedy. But I've referred for years to actually Scott Adams. He had this famous kind of career advice he would give people, which I think makes a lot of sense, which dovetails with what you're saying, which is he used to say it's like, look, he said, I could have been a pretty good cartoonist, or I could have been like pretty good at business. But the fact that I was a cartoonist who understood business made me like spectacularly great at making Dilbert. Right? Because even the world's best cartoonists who didn't understand business could have never written Dilbert. And then the world's best business people who didn't know how to do cartoons couldn't have done Dilbert. It took somebody who actually had both of those skills to be able to make Dilbert, right? Which is one of the most successful cartoons in history. Right. And so the way Scott always described it was that from a career development standpoint, the additive effect of being good at two things is like more than double. Right. The additive effect of being good at three things is more than triple. Right. Because you become a super relevant specialist in the combination of the domains. And you see this all. You see this all over. You see this all over the economy. You see this all over the economy. But I'll just give you an example. Hollywood. Just Hollywood as an example. There are a lot of writers who can't direct a movie, and they can be very successful writers. There are a lot of directors who can't write a movie, they can be very successful directors. But the superstars in the entertainment industry are the people who can write and direct. Right. And, they don't have a term for those. They call those auteurs. Right. And that's, those are the people who are like the real creative forces that move the field. And so again, and by the way, Hollywood, it's just really funny. It's been spending a lot of time talking to Hollywood people about AI. Hollywood has the same Mexican standoff going right now that we described in tech, except in Hollywood, for example, for filmmaking, it's the director, it's the writer, and the actor. Right. Because the director is now thinking, wow, I don't need the writer anymore because the AI can write the script, and I don't need the actor anymore because I can have AI actors. The writer is saying, wow, I don't need the director because the AI can direct the movie and the AI can do the actors. And the actor is saying, I don't need either one of these guys. I can have the AI direct the thing. I can have the AI write the thing, and I'm just going to show up and do my performance. Right. And so it's the same kind of triangular configuration. And again, what's great about it is they're all correct. Right. Each person in each of those three fields is going to be able to expand laterally and pick up those additional skills. And then as a consequence, you're going to have more people who can write and direct, or write and act, or direct and act, or do all three. And I think, to your point, like your T-shaped thing, like I think that's going to be true basically across the entire economy. And if you think about the T, if you think about the T configuration, it's like, yeah, the breadth, the top of the T is like, how many individual domains are you familiar enough with to be able to use the AI tools to be able to do really good work? And then this part of the T is how deep can you go in at least one of those domains so that you really, really deeply know what you're doing. But like if you're like super deep on coding and you can use AI to do design and you can use AI to do product management, right? That's your T right there. And you're a triple threat at the top of the T, but with this level of technical grounding underneath that. And I mean, at that point, you're the super powered individual. You're going to be able to just perform like feats of magic For example, in terms of designing and building new products, the people in my generation couldn't have even dreamed of. And so I think that this is a universal kind of theory that I think can apply across the entire economy.
I'm going to invent a new framework right now. Okay, forget the T framework. I'm picturing an F sideways or an E, where there's two or three, I don't know, downward parts. And so what I'm hearing is get good at least two.
Yeah, I think that's right. The combination. Yeah. My friend Larry Summers had a different version of the Scott Adams thing, which is he used to tell people, he said, the key for career planning is, he said, don't be fungible. Right. And he's an economist, and so that was economics speak. And what that means is essentially is don't be replaceable. And so don't be a cog, right? So and what that meant was don't just be one thing, right? So if you're quote unquote, again, just a designer, just a product manager, just a coder, like then in theory you can be swapped in or out. But if you have this E or F, laying on its side kind of thing, and if you have this combination of things that's actually quite rare, then all of a sudden you're not fungible. Not only you're not fungible, like you're actually massively important because you're one of the only people in the world who can actually do that combination of things. That your ability now to become one of those people is like just titanically enhanced with AI as compared to anything we've ever seen before.
This is so interesting because I've worked with people that are good at these two skills, and they were always called unicorns at the company. Right. She can code and design. Oh my God. And what I'm hearing here is this is what you need to become. You need to become really good at least two things. I think you used the term smokestack or something, where it's like PM over here, engineer, design. And what I'm hearing here is you need to get good at least two of these skills. The silos of these two roles are disappearing.
That's right. And again, I can't overstress the following for anybody listening to this. The thing about AI that I think people are just like not getting enough benefit out of yet is just it will teach you. Like, this is amazing. Like, there's never been a technology before where you can ask it, like, teach me how to do this thing. And so I always feel like it's like people spend too much. It's one of these things where it's like so much focus on figuring out how to use like a large language model is like, okay, what am I going to try to get it to do for me? Right. Which is, of course, very important. But the other side of it is, what can I get it to teach me how to do? Right. And it's just as good at that. Right. And so again, this level of latent superpower. Like, people who really want to like improve themselves and like develop their career should be spending every spare hour, in my view, at this point, talking to an AI, being like, all right, train me up, like super empower me, tell me how to, train me how to be, I'm a coder, train me how to be a product manager. It will happily do that. It knows exactly how to do that. Run me, make me problems, make me assignments, then evaluate my results. Right. And it will do that just as happily as it will do work, quote unquote, for you.
Two tricks I've heard along those lines. One is to watch the output, what the agent is doing and thinking as it's doing the work. So if you're not an engineer, just sit there and watch it think and make decisions. And it's almost become this like layer on top of learning to code, is learning to see what the agent is doing and thinking, because that teaches you about architecture. And the other is a couple podcast guests have mentioned this. When you get stuck and then you figure out how to unstuck yourself, you ask it, what could I have done differently? What could I have said that would have avoided this error in the first place?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, look, on that first one, and this is what I'm doing with my 10-year-old. Yeah, look, if you ask an AI, this is a really good point. So if you ask an AI, write me this code, and then it doesn't, and it comes back and it doesn't work right. Like, if all you know is like single function, I asked it and it gave me back something that's not good, like, well, what do you even do with that, right? Like, you don't understand why it gave you that result. Do you really understand it? Do you even understand what to tell it to try to get it to do something different? But to your point, like, if you actually watch what it's doing, and then you have the grounding, kind of that leg of your E or your F. If you have that grounding, then you can be like, oh, I see what it's doing. I see where it made the mistake. I see where it went sideways. And then you're all of a sudden able to intervene and able to say, no, that's not what I meant. Do this other thing. Right. And so, and again, this is a big part of having the actual kind of, synergistic relationship, is that you understand. And by the way, look, I mean, this is like everything I'm saying is, everything that we're saying right now also is the same as if you're working with human beings, right? Like, if you and I are colleagues and I, would ask you to do something, you'd come back with something completely different. Like, I do need to understand what was happening in your head, right? In order to be able to give you feedback, right? If I just tell you, oh, that's wrong, it doesn't, like, nothing happens. I need to actually understand. I need to have theory of mind, right? I need to understand what you were thinking in order to really give you the right feedback. And again, the great thing with AI is AI will happily sit there and explain all day long why it's doing what it's doing. It'll happily critique itself. You can do this. By the way, it's also a very fun thing where you can have one AI critique the other AI, right? Which is another thing, which is like you have one AI write the code, you have another AI debug the code. And so you can actually you can play the AIs off against each other and get them to argue with each other. And yeah, these are all the kinds of skills that are going to become, I think, incredibly valuable.
I think people call those LLM councils.
Yes.
They're talking to each other.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I do feel like if I were like, I have no design background. I've always wanted to design. I've always wanted to be a great designer. It feels like that's the hardest one to learn of all these three by just watching and talking, right? Because there's a lot of exposure hours, as folks have used this term, just like, how do you learn to be a great designer? That feels like that's going to be really hard and valuable.
So my true confession is I've always kind of wanted to be a cartoonist, but I have no like art skills. But as we're talking, I'm like, it might be time.
Their time has come, Mark.
Yes.
I want to pivot to founders, maybe your bread and butter.
Sure.
You spent a lot of time with the most cutting edge AI forward founders. I'm curious what you see them do, how you see them, some way they operate that's maybe blowing your mind about how the future of starting a company looks, how the future of AI forward companies look.
Yeah, so this is it's a very topical topic that's all playing out in real time right now on the leading edge. So I think there's like 3 layers of it, and see if this makes sense. I think there's like 3 layers of it. I think layer 1 is they're thinking, all right, how does AI redefine the products themselves, right? And this is kind of the time honored kind of thing that happens at technology transitions, and this is kind of what a lot of venture capital is based on, which is okay, there's a new technology that comes out, and maybe it's the personal computer or the iPhone or the internet, or now it's AI, and it's like, all right, is this a new capability that gets added to existing products? Right. So all of a sudden you've got, I don't know, an existing, software business, and now you've got your, PC version of it, and now you got your iPhone version of it, and you just kind of keep on going. And, you kind of add the new technology kind of gets kind of added into the mix. It's kind of another ingredient into an existing formula. And of course, a lot of new technologies are like that, right? I don't know when flash storage came out or something, it didn't really redefine the software industry, because people just went from using, hard disk using flash storage or something. But when the internet came out, like basically old school on-prem software, for the most part, not entirely, but like a lot of it died and just got replaced by like web software. Right. And so sometimes you get the kind of, it's additive to an existing thing. Sometimes you get it redefines an entire product category, redefines an industry. The actual, in many cases, the companies themselves turn over. And so there's sort of this question, and like, an example, you just mentioned Nano Banana. So like a great example is there are these businesses like, just take Adobe, like, Photoshop has built a 40-year franchise in image editing. Okay, is AI a sort of a feature now that gets added to Photoshop to be able to do AI-based image editing? Or, do you just like stop editing images entirely because you're using Nano Banana and all images are just being generated, and it's just easier to just have AI generate a new image than it is to try to edit an old one? And so I think, there's many areas of tech in which that question is being asked, and, the answers I think will vary by domain, but obviously as a venture firm, we're betting hard on many of these categories being totally reinvented, and a lot of the best founders are trying to figure out how to do that. So that's kind of AI, changing the definition of the product. I think the next layer is actually a lot of what we've already talked about, which is AI changing the jobs. And so it's, a lot of what we've already talked about, but like, okay, if I'm a founder of a company and I've got, if I have, room in my budget for 100 coders, how do I get those coders to be super empowered AI coders, not the kind of coders I used to have? And if they're super empowered AI coders, then does that mean, do I still need the 100? Maybe now I only need 10. Or does that mean I still want 100, but now they're doing 10 times more? Right. And so that, as like a lot of the best founders are working on that right now. And then I think the third shoe to drop hasn't quite dropped yet, but it's kind of the big one, which is like, all right, like the basic idea of having a company, right? Does that change? And again, here you've got this concept of the superpowered individual, which is like, okay, can you have entire companies where you have basically the founder does everything? Right, because what the founder is doing is like overseeing an army of AI bots, and there's sort of this, there's kind of this holy grail in our industry that's been running for a long time, which is like, can you have like the one person $1 billion outcome? And we've had a few of those over the years. Bitcoin is probably the most spectacular example, with Ethereum right behind it, which wasn't quite one person, but a very small team. You had kind of Instagram and WhatsApp that had very big outcomes with very small teams. Every once in a while you get one of these things where you just, something hits and you just have a, very small number of people associated with it. But that said, most software companies obviously end up with, huge numbers of employees. And so I think, so the most leading edge founders are thinking of like, okay, how do I reconstitute the actual very definition or idea of having a company, and can you have a company that's literally basically just all AI? And so, and if you're doing, if you're doing anything in the real world, that's hard. But if you're doing software like that seems like it might be feasible in some cases. And then, there's like the ultimate example of that, which is like, can you have like AI, can you have like autonomous, like AI economy stuff happening where you have like AI bots on the blockchain or something, that are basically out there like functioning as a business and like making money, and just, literally where the AI does all the work itself and just get, issues me dividends. And so maybe that's the final outlier result. We have a few founders who are chasing that kind of thing. So I would describe that as kind of the ladder that the best founders are on.
Super interesting. This whole idea of a one-person billion-dollar company, I think it depends on your definition of what this is, like an outcome I could see. Running my newsletter as one person with some contractors, there's so many little annoying things that I have to deal with just support tickets and issues and bugs. And like, it's hard for me to imagine actually a one-person billion-dollar company, even if AI is handling so much of your support, because there's just so many random edge cases that I'm just constantly like filling out forms. And so I guess depends on, do you have contractors? Does that count? As, like what does it mean to be a one person? But I'm just like, I can't see that happening.
Yeah. I mean, look, Bitcoin, Satoshi pulled it off.
But like, the open source community, like, does that count? I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it counts. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, and I would say I don't propose to have answers here, but more just like the smartest people I know are many of the smartest people I know are thinking hard about this. So.
Yeah. What do you think about moats? A big question constantly in AI, the fact that everything's changing. Just what's your guys' thesis on moats in AI? Is that even a thing? Do you care?
My experience with like really big technological transformations, and of course I kind of lived this directly with the internet and I saw this happen, is the really big technological transformations, they take a long time to play out, and there's all of these structural implications that just kind of cascade out over time. And then there's kind of this like rush to judgment up front where people kind of say, oh, it's therefore obvious that, XYZ. It's therefore obvious that this kind of company is going to be the company of the future, not that kind. It's obvious that this incumbent's going to be able to adapt and this other one isn't. It's obvious that there's economic opportunity in this kind of startup and not in these others. It's obvious that the moats are going to be in this area of the technology, but not in this other area. And what everybody does is they kind of state those things with like just an enormous amount of self-assurance, where they really sound like they have all the answers. And then, what happens is these ideas kind of saturate the media, right? Because the media naturally prizes like definitive answers over open questions. Because, you want, like when CNBC is like booking guests, they want a guest who's going to come on and say, yes, this is the way it's going to be X. Not like, I think that's a really good question, and let's like debate it from like 8 different angles. And what I found is if you look back on those predictions a few years later, and you can do this, by the way, if you pull up like coverage of the internet from like 1993 through like 1997, or even through like, for that matter, even through like 2005 or 2010, and you look at like the kinds of confidence statements people were making in the first 10 or 15 years, like I would say like almost all of them were wrong. Again, generally like quite badly wrong. And so I think the process, if there's going to be a massive amount of technological change, it's going to be like, I don't know, 5 or 6 layers of like structural change that will play out over time. And again, we've talked about a lot of this, but like it implications on like, what are the definitions of products? What are the definitions of companies? What are the definitions of jobs? What are the definitions of industries? How does this play out at the national level? How does this play out at the global level? How does this by the way, how does this intersect with politics? How does this intersect with, unions? How does this intersect with, war? What's China going to do? And so it's just like, there are just a tremendous number of unknowns, like a very, very large number of unknowns. And I think it's just like really, really dangerous to prejudge these things. And so I'll just give, and I'll just run this as a thought experiment, so you see what you think on this, but it's like, like do AI models, are AI models themselves like defensible? Like, is there a moat on AI models? And on the one hand, you'd be like, wow, it certainly seems like there is or should be, because like if something takes, billions of dollars to build, and you need this like incredible critical mass of like compute and data, and there's only a certain number of engineers in the world that know how to do this, and they are getting paid like MBA stars, and then these companies have to deal with all these like crazy political issues and press issues and reputational stuff and regulatory and legal. like all of that translates to like, okay, probably at the end of this, there's going to be 2 or 3 companies that are going to end up with like, 100%, I don't know, whatever, 50-50 or 30-30-30 or 90-10-1 or whatever it is, market share. And then they're going to have whatever profitability they have. And it's going to be a kind of a classic oligopoly. And, or maybe, maybe one company's going to win definitively. It'll be a monopoly. And by the way, those outcomes have happened in software many times before. And so maybe that will be the outcome. The other side of it is, if you had told me 3 years ago, that in the, kind of Christmas of ChatGPT, that like within basically a year to year and a half, there would be, 5 other American companies that would have basically, exactly capable products. And then there would be another 5 companies out of China that would have exactly capable products. And then there would additionally be open source that was basically the same. I would have been like, wow, like, the thing that seemed like it was black magic all of a sudden, has become like commoditized really fast, which by the way, is exactly what happened, right? Like, within a year of GPT-3 coming out, there were open source GPT-3s running on a fraction of the hardware, right? That were available for free. And then there were 5, now you've got, in the game, fully in the game, you've got Google and you've got Anthropic and you've got XAI and you've got Meta and you've got, all these other companies that are, and then DeepSeek and, Kimi and all these other Chinese companies. And so like, even at the level of like LLMs or, AI models, like you can squint and make that argument either way. By the way, same thing at the level of apps, right? It's like, one school of thought is, the apps are not a thing because like the model's just going to do everything. But another way of looking at it is no, actually adapting the model is kind of the engine into a domain involving human beings, where you need to like actually have it fit for purpose to be able to function in the medical industry or the legal industry or whatever, or coding. No, you actually need like the application level is actually going to matter enormously, and maybe the LLMs commoditize and maybe the value goes to the apps. And again, you can kind of squint either way on that one. And I know very smart people who are on both sides of that argument. And so my honest answer on this is I think we're in a process of discovery over time, which is, it's in the way I think about this kind of structurally is it's a complex adaptive system. The technology itself, provides one of the inputs. The legal and regulatory process, is another input. Actual individual choices made by entrepreneurs, matter a lot. The economics matter a lot. Availability of investor capital varies over time. That matters a lot. And this is a complex system, and so we actually don't know the outcomes on this yet, and we need to be open to surprises at the structural level of what happens. And of course, as a VC, this is very exciting because it means we're doing this now. We should kind of make bets along every one of these strategies and kind of see and see how this plays out. And I would just say, like, there may be like one, I don't know, there may be like one particularly brilliant, I don't know, hedge fund manager or something who has this all figured out. But I guess I would say if they exist, I haven't met them yet.
So what I'm hearing here is don't over obsess with moats at this point because we have no idea what it'll end up being. And as much as it may feel like, okay, there's no way OpenAI will lose this lead. Clearly, we're seeing a lot of competition. GPT wrapper point is really great. It was such a derogatory term. I don't know, a year ago, just like you're just GPT wrapper. Now it's like the companies that are the biggest companies, fastest growing companies in the world. Yeah,
well, it's like a little bit like, I don't know. I mean, even just like with this has been the holiday. If 3 years ago was the holiday of ChatGPT, this last month or whatever has been the holiday of Claude, particularly Claude Code, right, for coding. But it's like it's pretty amazing because it's like, okay, there was Claude, which is obviously a great accomplishment, but then there's Claude Code, which is an app, right? It's a Claude wrapper. Right, it's agent harness, and then they did this amazing thing where they came out with Coworker, Cowork, and remember what they said of Cowork, which is Claude Code wrote Cowork in a week.
Yeah, a week and a half. Yep, 100%.
Well, and there's 2 ways of looking at that, which is like, wow, that's really impressive. I mean, obviously, that's really impressive that Claude Code was able to build Cowork in a week and a half. That's great. That's amazing. The other way to look at it is Cowork was developed in a week and a half. Like how much complexity could there be? How much of a barrier to entry can there be in something that was developed in a week and a half? And so, and then again, it's this push and this pull thing where it's like wow, it's incredibly functional, incredibly valuable, and people are like all over the world every day now are like, wow, I can't believe what I can do with this. It's like the most magical product ever, but at the same time, it took a week and a half. Right. And so every other model company, I'm sure you'd have to expect is sitting there being like, okay, obviously we need to build, an agent harness. And then obviously we need to build a Cowork, thing for regular people. And obviously, I'm not even saying I know anything, but just like, obviously they're all going to do that. right? And so, how defensible is that? And, in 6 months, and we've seen this happen before, like is Claude Code going to get lapped the same way that, GitHub Copilot got lapped? The history in the last 3 years has been everything that looks like it's like the fundamental breakthrough gets basically replicated and lapped very quickly. Like many of the smartest people I know in the field, when I really kind of talk to them, kind of, get a couple drinks in them, they're like, yeah, they're basically, one theory is like there really aren't any secrets among the big labs. Like the big labs kind of all have the same information and they kind of have all the same knowledge, and they lap each other on a regular basis, but there's not a lot of proprietary anything at this point. And then again, evidence of that is DeepSeek came out of left field and basically was like a re-implementation of a lot of the ideas out of the American big labs, and and had some original ideas of its own. But wow, it wasn't that hard for some basically a hedge fund in China to do it, and so like how much defensibility is there? But on the other side of it, you've got, wow, these big labs are now paying individual engineers like they're rock stars, and they're incredibly bright and creative people. And maybe there's a dozen nascent ideas in any one of these labs that it's actually going to be a huge breakthrough that's going to be hard to replicate. And so again, it's just like I think we just need to, I don't know, my view of myself, I need to put like a big discount on my forecasting ability on this one. Like for me, it's much less interesting to try to say, okay, as a consequence, industry structure in 5 years is going to be X. The big winner in the category is going to be company Y. The big product killer app is going to be Z. It's like I don't think I can predict that. I think a much better use of my time is being very flexible and adaptable at a time like this.
So with all this in mind, do you feel like there's something you're paying attention to more to help you decide, okay, this is where we want to place our bet? Or is the answer essentially the strategy you guys have, which is place a lot of bets? You guys raised the largest fund in history. Is that the way you win in this world?
Yeah. So for us, we obviously have a very, very deliberate strategy. One way to think about this, use the Peter Thiel. You remember the Peter Thiel formulation of, he said there's a 2x2, there's optimism and pessimism. And then there's determinate and is it indeterminate and indeterminate, right? And so, and he always argued that like Silicon Valley is characterized by too much what he calls indeterminate optimism, right? And what he always described, what he meant by that is basically, I think the way he would describe it is an indeterminate optimist who thinks the world is going to be better but can't explain why, right? Like some combination of things is going to happen to make the world be better, even if we don't know what those things are. And I think he at least historically would say like that's basically that risks at least being just like wishful thinking or delusional thinking, and what the world needs more is determinate optimists, which are people who are like, no, the world is going to be better because I'm going to do this specific thing, right? And he would classify, for example, Elon. He would sort of maybe say VCs are indeterminate optimists. And then he would say, Elon is the determinate optimist, where it's like, no, I'm going to build the electric car. I'm going to do, solar, and then I'm going to do, Mars, right? And I'm going to do these very concrete things. And I think there's a lot to Peter's framework. But the way I would describe it is, I think maybe if he and I disagree on part of that, it would be, I think the indeterminate optimism is a stronger phenomenon than at least I think he's historically represented it as. And I would put myself firmly in the indeterminate optimist category. And that's the strategy that we have at A16Z, which is, and the reason for that is it's not, hopefully it's not so much wishful thinking. It's more, no, what the indeterminate optimism of venture capital or the indeterminate optimism of A16Z or Silicon Valley is it's actually very specific, which is there are these extremely bright and capable people like Elon and many others who are founders, right? And product and kind of product creators, right? And each of those individual people is a determinate optimist. Like each of them individually has like a very strong view of what they're going to do. But the great virtue of the capitalist system, the great virtue of the American economy, the great virtue of Silicon Valley is we don't just have one of those, and we don't just have 10 of those. We have 100 and 1,000 and then 10,000 of those. And the way to optimize the outcome is to have as many of those as possible, be as good as possible, run as hard as possible. And then just the nature of the future is like we just don't know all the answers, and that's okay. And the right way to deal with that is to run as many experiments as possible and have as many smart people trying to do as many interesting things as possible. And so, yeah, I would put myself firmly on the side of the indeterminate optimist.
I'm wondering if the answer to the question of what you look for now more and more is this determinate optimistic founder that has this massive ambition and is actually working on achieving it.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, look, the founders need to be determinate optimists. Like they need to have a very specific plan. Now, and look, the critique always, the critique from the founders is, oh, you VCs have it easy because like you don't actually have to commit, right? You don't actually have to like make, you don't actually have to like, you have to make the bet you lay in. You can like place multiple bets. You can operate as a portfolio. You should have a lot more sympathy for us as founders. because we only get to make the one bet. And there's truth to that. The counter argument on that is the founders get to run their companies, we don't. so we don't get to put our hand on the steering wheel. And so, the great virtue of being a determinate optimist is you actually get to single-mindedly execute against that goal. And look, in the long run, who does history remember? History remembers Henry Ford, right? Not, whoever was whatever the seed investor who seeded Ford Motor Company, and 10 other car companies have failed, right? And so, the determinate optimist is the founder is the founder and the company builder and the engineer. I mean, these are the people who actually do the thing and, deserve 99.9999% of the credit. But having said that, I do think there is a role for having some indeterminate optimists in the background, helping along the way and helping keep the whole cycle going.
Do you think about AGI in shifting your investment thesis? Like as we approach AGI and hit AGI as an investor, how do you think about your investment thesis changing?
Yeah, so I've always kind of had a little bit of an issue. I've always kind of struggled with the concept of AGI because it at least, well, let's define terms, which is where I kind of struggle with it, which is there's like the prosaic definition of AGI. And then there's like the, cosmic definition. And the way I would describe it as, well, let's start with the cosmic one. So the cosmic one is basically it's the singularity, right? And so AGI is the moment where you enter the singularity, which is to say that where the world fundamentally changes. And like the rules of the old world are gone, we're now operating in a new domain. And then, the kind of the full definition of singularity is like it's a world in which, human judgment is no longer really relevant because you get this self-improvement loop. The AI is improving itself. And it's sort of so-called takeoff scenarios. You get this takeoff thing where the AI is improving itself and the machines are making decisions so much faster than people. And people are just sitting there watching the machine do its thing. And I kind of described it. I don't really think I don't think we live in that world. Like whether you could call that utopian or dystopian, like I don't think we're lucky or unlucky enough to live in that world. We could debate that. We can talk about that more. But the prosaic definition of AGI that at least I think the industry participants have kind of converged on, and tell me if you agree with this, is it's when the AI can do every economically relevant task as good as a person.
The way the co-founder of Anthropic put it is like a basket of the most valuable economic tasks. So it's like 10, 15, not every single economically valuable task.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so that's maybe even a slightly reduced definition. And by the way, you were clearly getting close to that if we're not already there. And so on that one, I kind of feel like the cosmic one overstates what's going to happen, and then I kind of feel like the kind of AGI definition that you just gave, I think it kind of understates what's going to happen. It's almost too reductionist, and the reason for that is I don't think there's any reason to assume that human skill level is the cap on anything. Right. And so the way we say that is AGI always is, the definition you gave, the definition I give, it's it's always kind of relative in comparison to a human worker. Right. And it's like, I don't know, like human skill level caps out at a certain point, but that's because of the inherent like biological limitations of the human organism. Right. Like I gave you an example, human IQ, kind of what they call fluid intelligence, or the sort of G factor of kind of, fluid intelligence. IQ, I think, tops out in humans as a species. It tops out around 160, right? Where at like 160, it's like Einstein level. Einstein, Feynman.
In terms of IQ.
Yeah. In terms of IQ. Like, you just tops out at 160. The 160 IQ people are the ones who come up with new physics. There's only a small handful of those. Generally speaking, when we run into somebody in the world who's like incredibly smart, who's like a best-selling author, or like one of the world's best, research scientists, or one of the world's best doctors, or whatever, it would be probably 140 is kind of the IQ that you're looking for there. If you're looking for like a really good lawyer, it's probably 130. If you're looking for like a really good like line manager in a business, it's probably 110. If you're looking for like an accountant, like a small business accountant who's good at doing the books for small businesses, is probably 105. Right. And so the kind of scope of like impressive human, the ability of the human organism to do intellectually impressive things, it's sort of that 110 to 160 is kind of the spectrum. And, good news is there's a lot of those people running around, but like, there's not that many at 140, 150, 160. But it's like, that's like the limitations of what can fit in here. Right. And it's like, there's no theoretical limit on where this goes if you release the limitations of human biology. Right. And so can you have you already have people running these experiments to kind of do human equivalent, kind of IQ, for existing AI model. And by the way, existing AI models right now are kind of testing around the 130, 140 level, which means they're going to get to the 160 level. And they're arguably on the mass side starting to get to the 160 level now. But like, I think we're going to have AI models relatively quickly that are going to be like 160, 180, 200, 250, 300. By the way, and I think that's great, right? Like I feel as great about that as I do about the fact that we occasionally get an Einstein, right? It's like, would the world be better off or worse off with more or fewer Einsteins? And the answer is, of course, the world would be better off with more Einsteins, and of course, the world would be better off with machines that have IQ, more IQ like Einstein or greater than Einstein. But like, I think IQ of the machines is going to exceed that of the humans. I think that's really good. And then the performance, again, it goes back to like the AI coding thing is happening. The performance against task is going to get better also. Like I think, this is where Linus Torvalds in particular is like, yeah, okay, like this thing is starting to generate better code than I can. Okay, so now we're going to have AI coders that are actually better coders than the best human coders. I think that's great. I think we're going to have AI doctors that are better than the best human doctors. I think we're going to have AI lawyers that are better than the best human lawyers, which actually is going to be very, very interesting to see, which we can talk about, which I think is also great. And so like, I don't think I think we're used to living in a world where we just don't understand how good can get because we've been capped by our own biology. And we're going to get to experience what it's like when you have the capability at your fingertips that's actually better than human in these domains. And so you see what I'm saying, which is like, I think this idea of like human equivalent is just going to be like a footnote. It's like, oh yeah, that was just on Tuesday, in 2026 is when they hit that. And it kind of didn't matter because the next question was like, okay, what do we get to do in a world in which we actually have machines that are better than that? Right. And so I think this is going to be much more of an exploratory process for actually exceeding human capability than it's going to be any sort of particular singularity moment or whatever that just happens to coincide with the human threshold.
200 IQ. I just like that frame of reference is such a mind expanding way to think about it, just how fast and how smart these things are going to get and quickly.
Well, I don't know if you have this experience. I have this experience all the time. Well, two experiences I have all the time. One is just like, I'm just like, I know I ought to be able to do this, but like, I just can't, like, it's going to take too long. I want to write this thing, or I want to like, whatever, I want to have this theory on this thing, or I have a plan or whatever. And it's just like, fuck, like, I don't have the 8 hours or by the way, the 8 weeks or the 8 years. Right. And like, I just don't know enough yet. And I'm just like, I can't do the math in my head and my memory isn't perfect. And like, I can't remember. And I read, after you have this, you get interested in something, you read 10 books and then you're like, shit, I forgot almost everything that I just read. Like I wish I could retain it all, but I can't. It's just like, you just have this, I sort of live in this kind of state of like endless frustration. I was like, if I could just be smarter than I was, like I'd be so much better at what I do, but I'm not. So there's that. And I don't know how often you have this, but I have this on a regular basis. It's just like, I because of what we do, like I know a bunch of people who I know for fucking sure are smarter than I am. And I know it because when I talk to them, I just find myself at a certain point, it's like for the first half of the conversation, I'm just taking notes the entire time. And for the second half of the conversation, I'm just like, fuck me. Like this person is just smarter than I am and they're just outthinking me and they're going to keep outthinking me. And I just can't. And I'm just like, all right, God damn it. Like I got to go home and I got to like have a drink because I'm just not, I'm just not, whatever that is, I'm not that. And so we're just so used to having those limitations that the idea of having machines that work for us that don't have those limitations, I think that's much more exciting than people are giving it credit for.
Oh man, I could talk to you for hours, Mark. I'm thinking to close out the conversation, I want to ask about your media diet and your product diet. Yep. You just talked about books, reading 10 books. I think you famously read constantly. I saw an interview with you where you're just like, AirPods changed my life. I'm just listening to audiobooks now all the time. So in terms of media diet, what are you reading? What are you paying attention to these days in terms of, I don't know, podcasts, newsletters, blogs, things like that, and then any books in particular?
Yeah. So what I read is basically, I would say I read basically three categories of things. So like in terms of like general media, it's basically, I sort of, I always describe it as I have almost a perfect barbell strategy, which is I read X and I read old books. Right. So it's basically either like up to the minute what's happening right now, or it's like a book that was written 50 years ago that has stood the test of time. And then, where presumably there's something timeless in it. And then it's sort of everything in the middle. I'm always like much more skeptical about. And it's, in particular, it's kind of what I already said, which is I think if you go back and you read nobody ever does this. It's actually really funny. Nobody ever does this. There's no market for it. But if you go back and you read old newspapers, and by the way, you can do this. Just read last week's newspaper, right? I'd say we're taping on Friday. So read last Friday's newspaper, right? And just go back and read it and be like, oh my God, like none of this happened. Like none of what they predicted played out the way that they said that it would. none of this turned out to actually be that like relevant or correct. Like they didn't understand, like, by the way, they had no view of what was going to happen this week. They couldn't know. And so they were making predictions and forecasts and so forth based on like not having information. But it's just like, wow, like, like none of this happened. Like, I wish I had never read this. Like, oh my God. And then, it's kind of the same thing with magazines. Like, go back and read old magazines, and just like the level of the endless numbers of predictions that they make. Yeah, and kind of, the problem with, newspapers, at least they're going day to day. The thing with magazines is like it's like a week or month, kind of long cycle. And so it's even, by the time an article even hits publication, it's often out of date. So I just have like a big problem with kind of everything in the middle. And so it's either of the moment or timeless. But then, yeah, you mentioned like newsletters. I mean, so the other thing, and this is maybe obvious, but I think it's probably still underrated, which is the actual practitioners in the field who are actually creating content, I think probably is still like dramatically underrated. And I think this is a huge part of like the Substack phenomenon and the newsletter phenomenon and the podcast phenomenon is like direct exposure to the people who are actually principals in the field who actually know what they're talking about is probably still dramatically underrated. And I think, again, the reason for that is like we're used to being in this mass media kind of culture in which basically everything is mediated, right? Everything got filtered through like TV interviews or like newspaper interviews or magazine interviews. And obviously now more and more it's just, no, you actually want like smart people who are actually working on something, explaining themselves. And then you have new kinds of intermediation like podcasts that kind of open that up for people and make that possible. And so, yeah, like domain practitioners are, really great. I mean, just to state the obvious in AI, it's obviously your stuff, but also like, Lex, the fact that like Lex Friedman can have, the world's leading or, whoever and any of you guys, there's a small handful of you guys who have access to these people. You can have the world's, kind of leading experts in the domain actually show up. And by the way, it's, it looks, the critique always is, people talk their book. Like if I'm running a startup or whatever, I'm just selling. But it's like, and there's always a little bit of that. But it's also, my experience is people love to talk about what they do. And they fundamentally like want to express what they do and they want to explain it and they want people to understand it. And everybody kind of enjoys that and they get to contribute to kind of human knowledge by doing that. And they get ego gratification by doing that. And so I think there's just tremendous amounts of alpha in listening to the world's leading experts in the space who actually just like show up and talk about what they're doing. And of course, like the world is awash in that today in a way that it wasn't as recently as 10 years ago. So I do as much of that as I can too.
And there's also just this culture in tech, Silicon Valley in particular, of sharing, of not trying to keep these secrets. Everyone on LinkedIn is always like, how is this free? Like, it's just the way it works.
Yeah, it's somebody said Silicon Valley is a company town, but the company is Silicon Valley, right? And again, at the level, this goes again, there's one of these great N equals one. At the level of N equals one is somebody, and I've run startups before, I've run companies before. At the level of N equals one of like running a company, that's just a giant pain in the fucking butt. Like, because your secrets are walking out the door and your employees are walking out the door and the whole thing sucks. But the other side of it is you also benefit from that, right? Because you get to hire people with all these skills and experiences, right? And you're in this ecosystem that adapts, right, and channels talents and skill and knowledge and people into the new fields. And so so there's kind of the push and pull of that at the level of just being an individual CEO. At the level of just being in the ecosystem, to your point, like, yeah, it's an absolutely magical phenomenon. And by the way, like, one of the for all the issues in Silicon Valley, I think AI, I did the count once. I think AI is the 9th major technology platform in the history of Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley is still called Silicon Valley. We haven't made silicon here in decades. Right. We used to actually, it's called Silicon Valley because they used to make chips, right? They used to have the actual fabs were in Silicon Valley, and then they designed them and they made the chips. And that was wave one starting in the actually more like wave 3 or whatever. But like it was that was when the area was named like in the 1950s. But now we're on like wave 9, right? And the company town phenomenon where the company is the industry, like you get the indeterminate optimism. Nobody had to sit and plan and say, okay, in the 1990s, Silicon Valley is going to do the internet. In the 2000s, they're going to do the smartphone. In the 2010s, they're going to do the cloud. In the 2020s, they're going to do AI. It just the indeterminate optimism of the ecosystem, flexibility of the ecosystem meant that the Silicon Valley could morph into all these categories. And again, maybe a testimony to indeterminate optimism.
This reminds me of the meme of how we're all just rappers over sand. Everything we're building is just rapper.
The rapper thing is hysterical. Yeah. I'm a software company now. I'm a chip rapper, right? I'm a business application. I'm a database rapper. Yeah, exactly. I'm a sand. You and I we're all now sand rappers.
Sand rappers.
Perfect.
Okay. One more question along the media diet. I asked your partner Ben Horowitz,
what to talk to you about, the Z in A16Z, if people don't know him. And he said that you're really into movies these days.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, any movies you're really into these days? Any movies you've absolutely loved recently?
Yeah, so the movie that blew my socks off last year, which I think is the best movie of the decade for sure, and maybe of the last like 15 years, is this movie. Unfortunately, it's one of these things that not a lot of people have seen it, but I would highly encourage it. It's called Eddington.
I've not heard of it.
Have you not heard of it? Okay, so Ed, you're going to really enjoy it. So I won't spoil too much of it. So at the surface level, the following spoils nothing. At the surface level, it's set in a small town in New Mexico called Eddington, which is a small town of about 600 people. And there's a sheriff who's played by Joaquin Phoenix, who's like an old, crusty, basically right winger. And then there's a mayor played by Pedro Pascal, who's basically a young, hip progressive. And then the movie starts, I think, in March of 2020. And so it starts when COVID first hits. And then it sort of, as it plays out over the next few months, it then intersects, and it sort of extends into the summer of 2020. So, kind of the George Floyd moment, and then the protests and riots and kind of everything. So it's sort of the convergence of COVID, and then all the BLM stuff. And then there's a third kind of element to it, which is there's a company which is basically a loosely disguised version of Meta, if you read the backstory of it, which is building an AI data center on the outskirts of town. So they kind of pull that in as sort of a thing that looms larger and larger over time. And then the thing it really is great at is it really shows, this is a small town in New Mexico. And so everybody in the town gets kind of fully wrapped up in all the COVID stuff, and they get fully wrapped up in all the BLM stuff, and they get fully wrapped up in all the tech anxiety stuff. But they're all experiencing it basically through the internet, right? Which is what actually happened, right? And so the reason I love the movie so much is one is it's the first movie that directly grapples with 2020, of what happened in 2020, and that just like fully engages and grapples with like all the dynamics that were playing out in the country. But the other reason is it's the first movie that does a really good job of showing what it was like, especially in that era, to live in a world in which there were things happening in the real world and people were kind of experiencing events online, like in a way that was like very central in their lives, right? And so it does like a really good job of pulling in like smartphones and social media in a way that movies really struggle with, and then the whole thing comes together in an incredibly entertaining way. And I won't even say I completely agree with the movie or whatever, and I think the director of the movie and I would probably disagree about a lot, but he really tries hard to like really grapple with like what it is actually like to live like a human being in the 2020s in America, in a way that I think many other filmmakers who are very talented have just been very scared of touching. And this guy, for some reason, he's just like, yeah, I'm just going to find all the third rails and I'm just going to like fucking grab them.
I can see why that's your favorite movie.
It's great. Everybody should see it.
Oh, man. Okay, final question. I want to ask about your product diet. Are there any products you use that maybe are less known that you love, that you want to recommend? You can, mention products to your investors and if you use them constantly.
I mean, we have so many that it's really hard to, I always feel it's like, here's your favorite children. So it's really hard to pull out specific ones. But I'll talk about a few. I'll just observation. So one is my 10-year-old. My 10-year-old right now is 100% obsessed with Replit. And by the way, it was not from me. Do you have kids?
I do. I have one 2.5-year-old.
2.5. Okay, so you haven't run into what I'm running into now, which is whatever it is you do is not cool. Right? Like it's 2.5. Whatever daddy does is like the coolest thing in the fucking world. I can tell you by the time he's 10, whatever you do is like deeply uncool. Right. And I'm highly aware of that. And so like if I mention, oh yeah, we work on XYZ, he's like, okay. But when he discovers something, then it's cool. Or when his friends tell him about it, it's cool. And so he through no interference on my part, discovered Replit about 3 months ago and discovered vibe coding and is like completely obsessed with vibe coding games and all kinds of things, and like literally will sit and do it for hours. And so I'm seeing that phenomenon play out, which is super fun. That's one. Two is I am just completely in love with all the AI voice stuff. I think it's just absolutely amazing, hysterical. My favorite party trick at dinner parties now is to pull out Grok with Bad Rudy, which is, if you've seen, it's a foul-mouthed raccoon avatar on the in the Elon's Grok app. So I think that's super fun. We have this company Sesame that had, they went viral last year for this, these just incredibly like, intimate, emotional, kind of voice experiences. So I think the voice stuff is fantastic. I'm also super fascinated by all the voice input stuff. And so, Limitless Suite, Limitless recently, company recently sold, but I think like the pendants, the wearables, like all that stuff is going to be big. The Meta glasses, I think there's going to be a whole wearables revolution here. I love the voice input stuff. I have this app there's this app on my phone now called Whisper Flow, which is voice transcription, which works like staggeringly well. It's like incredible. It's like a voice transcription function, but you can actually talk to the AI model while you're doing voice transcription. So you can it kind of understands when you're telling it, no, I want bullet points over there and I want this and that. And it understands that you're not telling it to type in the words, I want bullet points. It just actually understands that you want bullet points. And so like, that's a great example of a super useful thing. And so I think the voice mode stuff is going to be really great.
Subscribers of my newsletter get a year free of Replit and Whisper Flow. So there we go. What's the most memorable thing your son built with Replit?
Oh, well, so he's gotten super into Star Trek, and so far he's writing like Star Trek simulators. So like all the by Next Generation they actually had
Next Generation. Okay, I was going to ask which.
Well, we like them all. We watched the new Starfleet Academy last night, which actually is quite good. But we watched the original. We watched them all. But it was in Next Generation where they actually developed an actual design language for the computers. If you watch the original series, they just had like basically knobs with lights, and they didn't really they just like were like fucking around on set and trying to pretend they were doing it. But by Next Generation, they actually had a UI design language. And so one of the fun things you can do vibe coding is you can say, give me a Star Trek Next Generation user interface for whatever this, that, or whatever, and it actually uses they call it this. I'm a nerd out. They call it LCARS design language, and it'll actually build you like Star Trek Next Generation bridge consoles. Using that design language, but with your choice of like a Star Trek game, for example. And so he's going crazy for that kind of thing.
That sounds extremely delightful. You guys should open source or release that. Mark, like I said, I could talk to you for hours. You got things to do. Anything you want to leave listeners with before we wrap up? Anything you want to double down on or just leave listeners with?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one is we got super lucky last week. Packy McCormick wrote the best piece ever written about us, actually, which he released. And so it's the best explanation of what we do and how we think. And so I would definitely recommend that. And then, we're putting we have a great team of folks now. We're putting a lot of effort ourselves into video and content. And so I definitely recommend our YouTube channel, which I think has a lot of great stuff and is going to be very exciting in the next year.
Awesome. We'll link to that. I think it's just youtube.com/816z, something like that. And you guys have great stuff. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.